Welcome again to the Four Horsemen. I am joined by 3 Esports Journalist of the Year award winners from the Esports Awards. An award that maybe never had a lot of meaning, but has been decreasing in meaning steadily over time. And we have now hit rock bottom.
Thanks.
And that particular category might not even exist anymore, which kind of says it all, doesn't it? It's perfect natural sound to this episode.
That's why
we no longer can even give awards away to journalists. So
yeah, exactly. I figured it's a great point to start this conversation because basically, guys, if you didn't know, the Esports Awards is the next domino to fall in the great Saudi invasion of esports. The Esports Awards has now partnered with the Esports World Cup to host their award ceremonies there for the next several years. And the Esports Journalist of the Year award magically has now disappeared. Although I believe they are going to have a secondary show in London later this year where I expect that to be presented. But I wonder why that would be. It surely wouldn't be that all of the real journalists in this industry who might win that award are incredibly against the Saudi takeover. Perhaps the fact that the Saudi government has actually killed journalists on foreign soil,
already
murdered
journalists
them.
Disappear. The joke's right there, Monty. They already made journalists disappear. That's made all of them disappear at once like that.
So basically, this episode, guys, is going to be about the state of esports journalism, which is quite depressing now, not just for awards reasons, a lack of, I would say, legitimate recognition, but effectively the sites that have provided this journalism have been kind of one by one falling. The journalists themselves have been, in many cases, selling out. We see more branded content these days across a wide variety of channels. If you guys didn't know, the Saudis through ESL are now just like paying Rolling Stone in order to create fluff pieces effectively. So the entire section of Rolling Stone has now become, well, the entire esports section has now become just a branded content collaboration with Savvy Gaming, which owns ESL. And for example, you guys have had different experiences. Like Richard has moved to his Substack, Thorin's still on his YouTube. Kevin, who is employed by Sports Business Journal, which was doing some of the best I would say journalism within the scene, has killed that division. So Kevin, you are now working, how do you pronounce it? Sportskeeda?
Yeah, it's Sportskeeda. Yep.
Okay, so let's start there. Sports Business Journal, why did they kill the esports division? Because it felt like it was doing very well. And you guys had several reporters, including James Fudge for a while.
Yep.
And what is the changeover to Sportskeeda now?
So Sports Business Journal just simply thought, as they were sort of looking over the industry and seeing everybody sort of shuttering or abandoning ship, so to speak, they're watching, again, starting with ESPN and other sites that just started to fold, and then getting into sort of current history with sites, going away, and a bunch of developers and publishers laying off. And I think the big reason is when they saw the leagues start to fold up shop, meaning, look, the NBA 2K League just did a 180, right? They want to be like an Ice Cube 3-on-3 basketball show me league with professionals and things like that. But when all of the leagues started to change or morph into something they did not recognize, which is franchise sports leagues, right? Let's just be honest. Sports Business Journal is very, very in tune with the traditional sports model and everything that they're doing with that. They just thought maybe it was time to sort of reevaluate where they wanted to put their resources. And so I guess, from what I understand, they're going to go into a more of a gaming, which is weird to me, but they're going to go into a gaming sort of direction where they do, reports and articles about like the new college game for EA, right? So Madden, NBA 2K, they're going to just start and how that will connect with the various sports leagues, meaning, Hunter Cook did a really good article at SBJ a while back about how they had data on, NBA 2K players that went to a game for their first time, right? So those are the kind of stories they want to write. They just want to keep it with the traditional sports, and so they're just not seeing it. Let's put it that way, as a short way to end my long-winded answer.
No. Yeah, I got my own theory about it as well, because it's kind of like when the business people were investing in esports, and it was the hot new grift in a way that you could raise money by slapping esports on a potential investment document. Then all of a sudden, all of the publications came along, and they were like, "Oh, we must be covering this because it's of interest to the likes of Mark Cuban." All of a sudden, and then when the grift became apparent, and after a 5-year window of just wasted venture capital investments and angel seeding and all the rest of it, that was when a lot of the publications decided, yeah, this actually isn't worth our while at all to cover. And then they started segueing into other things, because obviously when you run a publication, a large part of it just is resource allocation. Like, you've got to see some sort of tangible nickel and dime return on an article you write, and unfortunately a lot of these publications fail at the editorial level because they don't really know how to create that compelling content. They think paying some unionized worker $60,000 a year to rewrite things they've seen on Twitter and Reddit is somehow editorial genius. They're fucking morons, of course. So obviously after a while, the proverbial penny's always going to drop. And if there's no substantive value outside of the nickel and dime return, i.e. you're not going to get a shout out from Mark Cuban because you've glazed one of his dog shit investments, then really what are we all doing? And so obviously now there's two ways you go. You either stop writing about esports entirely, you segue into gaming, or you just give up, or you just become wholly bought and paid for by whatever insidious entity is running esports this week. And this week it's the Saudis, and that's what Rolling Stone is. I mean, obviously Rolling Stone now which is hilarious if you go and look at some of the articles they've written about MBS and the Saudi Arabian kingdom in the past. They are now wholly a mouthpiece for the Saudi Arabian state esports washing exercise, and no doubt they'll do very handsomely for it. All of the people that are going to be working full-time over there, great salaries, great benefits, no doubt, no soul and no quality to a single word you write, but whatever, that's life.
Rich, you guys taught me a lot in the beginning of this journey, and I'm just going to tell you just real quick what it was. I saw that you couldn't be fair and have developers respect you. Meaning, everybody that I know that's been in journalism that has been super nice to them are working for them now. You know what I mean? Like, they've got jobs with these developers. But and I will say this, all the words that we have written that have been fair, meaning when they screw up, they got to be talked about so that it doesn't happen again. They're held accountable for their actions. That's what media is about, right? Protecting people from the big bad bosses that have all the money in the world. And then, and then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. Richard, when you and Duncan, myself, DK, we're all working at VP Esports. You remember when we had that group of guys together? We were crushing it. We went from 45,000 views to 5.5 million a month in 6 months' time. And for whatever reason, the people, no, not good enough. And imagine what that would have looked like today had that continued to grow. I feel like we'd be in the 100 million range per month. And I'm being dead serious, like with that group we have.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And obviously, again, I think it's definitely instructive. Like, views are never unfortunately, the way you monetize journalism, the way you monetize content now. The money is in doing the puff pieces, reaching out to a company, reaching out to a developer, doing early access pieces like, oh, you give me access to the video game, and we promise no matter how shit it is, we will not give it below a 7. And so, you know, people who probably don't work in the industry. I mean, it's kind of funny. I remember saying when I used to be a games reviewer, what used to happen is I would review the game, the score would go to my editor would bump it up 1 or 2 points, and then say to me, we can't afford to give it a bad review. I mean, 6 and a 7 is objectively not a bad review in my opinion, but whatever. We can't give it a bad review or we'll lose access. So I started. So I publicly said that, and I remember there was all like the fucking gremlins, like the Nathan Graysons of this world. We're all going, "You haven't even been a real game reviewer at a real website." And then obviously, fast forward a couple of years, the same people that were like attacking me are all coming out and going, "Yeah, we've all done that. We've all had to fake a review score to keep access of a game." And so if you apply that, you know, what was always present in the games industry to what was happening in esports, it's even worse. I mean, if you want access, and access can mean everything from like even being able to attend a third-party company's event that just so happens to be running the game's developer's video game, you are going to have to basically, you know, you're going to have to get your tongue right up Bobby Kotick's arsehole and pretend Overwatch is a good game and the Overwatch League is a good investment. And if you say anything contrary to that, your career is going to struggle. And just one final point on that before we kind of open it up. What's also really grotesque, I think, is there's a lot of people, you know, that masquerade as journalists, and I just call them friendlies. And what the friendlies do is they don't just gain access, they gain information that's in the public interest, but they don't share it because they have these like unwritten embargoes, essentially. So if you want a good example of this from, you know, recent times, relatively recent times, you know, like so many journalists knew about Heroes of the Storm getting shut down as an esport by Activision Blizzard when orgs didn't know. I mean, essentially Activision Blizzard's business partners, players didn't know, managers didn't know, commentators didn't know, and all these people were going out and making life choices like renting apartments, moving house, signing contracts, agreeing salaries, all of these things that have a profound impact on the business. And there was about half a dozen journalists that knew the exact date they were going to announce Heroes of the Storm was being closed. And they did that thing that everybody's been doing with Dr. Disrespect, which is, you know, the story comes out and then all the journalists go, I knew that. I knew about that. It's like, that's not a win for you. That's actually, that shows that you're a shill. You're bought and paid for. And so, unfortunately, a large problem we've got in this kind of reduction in quality of journalism is, you know, between the Saudis and the developers, you get squeezed out. Publications can't monetize. They can't even get numbers because 90% of the content they publish is absolute garbage. And unfortunately, the average fucking games journalist is someone that would give up their ethics and principles for a free fucking t-shirt. So, you know, I mean, like, I thought for a period of time in about 2016, 2017, when we were all doing our shit and it kind of felt like we were on the rise. I felt that was kind of like a golden era of esports journalism, and I thought we were going to be okay. I look at where we're at now, and we are on course for Jake Lucky accepting a fucking Journalist of the Year award in Riyadh. So just put a fucking gun in my mouth, I guess, at this point.
All right. So I do want to kind of rewind here and talk about the history of esports journalism before we get into the current state, right? Because all of you guys have worked at various publications. I think it's important to talk about, you know, going way back into kind of the original coverage sites of esports and just doing an overview of, because also there was the whole On Gamers thing, which was CBS Interactive's initiative. And then we've had a series of sites try and consolidate, you know, some of the best, you know, not only investigative journalists, you know, like yourselves, but also people who are creating written content, which is why we saw a bunch of money thrown into various VC funded initiatives like Upcomer, which was one that rose and died relatively quickly.
Twice.
And now we're twice. That's true. And now we're kind of coming up. So why don't we start there? So Thorin, I know you can talk about the early days of esports journalism, some of the original sites, and because we were all, or at least, you know, some of us were part of the whole On Gamers thing as well, because Summoning Insight, one of the shows that's on this network, was on Gamers for a time. People were full-time, including yourself, Thorin, were full-time salaried there, right?
One thing I'm confused by is when you say the original sites, but then say On Gamers, that's like 12 years after I began.
Right.
So what
Yes,
do you actually
I
mean by
understand.
original? Do you
We
mean
can go
On Gamers
back.
is where you want to start?
No, go all the way back.
Right. Well, basically, I would say in the first 10 years, so like the 2000s, let's say, of esports, it basically isn't a full-time job to be a journalist. Like, first of all, nobody even called themselves journalists. You're just a news poster. You just post news. And in fact, you have to remember, if we're talking about like most of the years of the 2000s, so before we even get to 2010, I think YouTube came out in something like 2007 or 8 or something. So there wasn't YouTube. There was no streaming. Video wasn't even a thing back then. Everything was text. And it was essentially a news post. And so actually the main thing back then is you have to think of the premise of how the internet was invented with why HTTP and sort of like the World Wide Web is what the internet became for mainstream people, is because you had the hyperlink. You have a link that can link to someone else's site or page. And so the entire initial premise of esports journalism was you worked for a site, might be your own personal, almost the equivalent of a blog, like a very simple, could be an Angel Fires or a GeoCity site if it's really, really scoffed. Or it might be one where you know someone who knows some basic HTML, or you've paid a web coder and you've got a site. It could be called counterstrike.net, it could be called CS Guides, whatever it would be called back then, So Gamed, etc. You'd have these sites. Sometimes they were specific, like it was like, this is a UK Counter-Strike site. Sometimes it's like, this is just Counter-Strike, but it's like modding with a bit of esports. Sometimes it's like, this is esports more general, a bit like what you'd recognize now, but there was very few of those. Obviously the likes of Gotfrag. And what you actually got back then was those sites, essentially, the news poster was the most important person, because back then there wasn't really that much like tailored, custom, bespoke content. What it was news came out, and because there wasn't a Reddit or a central hub or one giant site, actually what you would do is you would wake up, and if you were a hardcore fan, you had to visit about 15 different sites. So what they would do is the big sites obviously would essentially cross-link material. You actually wanted to do it back then, by the way, not even just to be good. You did it because you didn't have enough content for your site either, because again, you're not creating bespoke content. So the odds you've broken a story, you're going to break a story very rarely. So what would happen is every site actually was essentially just a rewrite of everyone else's news posts. So it would be like, hey, I saw Thorin posted an interview with Heaton over on insert whatever site. Maybe it was gamers.new back then, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And then I would then wake up and post something like, I mean, if Richard was around, it would have been like, Richard's just done a Source thing on this Source Junkies over here. And then the idea is he'd write a thing of like, oh, and on Gotfrag, Midway just did his playbook for this thing. And then everyone just cross-promoted, which is why, by the way, as an interesting point at the beginning, you notice back then, you can't be acrimonious, otherwise it doesn't work. The fabric of the system doesn't work. We're all essentially relying upon the idea we're passing a baton of news around the world, and that we're not censoring each other and using petty differences to be like, well, I won't put yours to fun because I think you're a piece of shit. It's like, no, if the idea was, if it's relevant to your readership, your audience, the people who every day load your site, and by the way, you're even incentivized then to post his news, because if they don't see that on their site, eventually they're going to go, wait a minute, he always has all the news, all of it, but then this guy selected, they're just going to stop going to yours. So back then, and this is a key point I want to make in this discussion, the incentives made sense. The downside was there was no money in the industry in general. So essentially everyone was doing it as an amateur, and even like ads and things like that made very, very little back then. This is the early days of the internet when it would be even less than now. Like the actual sweet spot came 10 years later. Then what you got was, when you got to the era of YouTube, into Twitch, into streaming, etc., now you had these mega sites that Monty's referring to. And the funny thing is, if people don't know why I've technically only ever worked full-time for one mega site, it's actually very relevant, which is I worked for On Gamers, essentially the first mega site, where they had outside money, CBS money, and they came and they gave everyone a full-time salary. At the time, by the way, it's not even that crazy compared to what people have made now, but at the time it was bonkers compared to what we all made before. I think I made 3 times more than I did before. And the joke goes that when I put the number on the piece of paper to pass back like some Mad Men skit, the guy just went, yeah, I think I'd do that. And he answered so fast, I was like, no, fucking hell. And then the worst thing is, I think I asked Slash like 2 years later, and he was like, I'm getting more than that. Brilliant. Yeah, great. Thanks, mate. Yeah, anyway, whatever. But the point is, that's how much it scaled up. But as I hope people get by that sense I just gave, that an industry veteran could be off what he could make by like a sizable fraction, that's why it was unsustainable, because it was just a giant sack of money being brought over to make this project. And the thing I learned, sadly, from behind the scenes, because believe it or not, by the way, the likes of Kim Rom, Cody, Connor, Ivoli, etc. Who's obviously now you know his fucking name.
He's
You
back.
wouldn't have, if I talked to you about a month ago, you wouldn't even know who that is, would you? But these people, when they were there, luckily I didn't get to just work there. I could actually talk to these people. Like, what's going on? Like, are we hitting numbers, etc.? And what they explained to me, sadly, was essentially that project never could ever have succeeded because the metrics weren't hits on a website. And at the time, all we all knew is how to do really good work, and hopefully it gets linked everywhere, Reddit everywhere, and you just get loads of hits, right? And then what you do is it's almost like one of those memes, they're like step by step, where it's always got the fourth step is like question mark, question mark, question mark, profit is the fifth one, right? Everyone back then had a cargo cult mentality, where the mentality was, if we do good work equals loads of eyeballs equals, I don't know, this guy we don't really know sells like a sponsorship, and then somehow we've all got our salaries, awesome, yeah, great job guys, 1 million hits on our way, what do you need, 10 million? Because I remember at one point when we got like banned from Reddit, I said to the guy on Gamers, right, how many views do we actually need though to like keep the site running? And he basically said, views isn't the model. And I was like, what? And he goes, oh no, we could have like 100 million views, or we could have 1 million views. That's not it. The model, believe it or not, is they think because of the views that we're going to either sell massive sponsorships, which would never happen, as in they wanted like 50k a month type sponsorships, like bonkers shit. Well, that would be like for a year if you don't know, guys. Like, so they wanted absurd ones. Or, like he says there, people will pay to have us create bespoke content for them, like a puff piece about their CEO. And what you very quickly realized, and this is in like, remember, the early 2010s, this is like 2014, 2013, is that era, you could get the views. That's what our specialty was. But nobody was investing that much for sponsorships and doing branding. It just wasn't a thing. And so I realized this model doesn't work. And I have to say, I actually do think it was the right move. That when I had people come to me when Yahoo Esports came out, you might work for us now. I had the hint that they might want to work with me at ESPN. By the time the upcomers and those came along later, I'd already made it quite clear I'm never going to work with these people, because I actually felt like, no joke, those sites are almost bad faith to join if you know what I know now, which is it can never make the money back. What you're basically doing when you join that site is you're just taking money from someone and going like, I'll do my best, but I can never accomplish what you want. What do you say? Oh, sorry, thanks for the money. Like, and you know that guy is going to lose all the money. And when he loses the money, there's literally going to be a day where he wakes up and he's not going to go, let's slowly, tape it. He's going to go, shut the whole thing, it's over. And everyone's going to lose their jobs. And so, by the way, it's even why on some low level, we can get to this later, I do sort of look down on some of the people where if you ever go and look, there are some names were in all of those sites. All of them. And the worst thing about the fact some were in all of them is every time it shuttered, they apparently never did like this basic due diligence to find out how their business worked, because they would always get surprised and they would always be like, oh, what's going on? Woe is me. The site's closed down. And it's like, bro, I want to sit them down and go, mate, you do know, if you know like what the rest of the industry was like, your salary never made sense. You were already actually overpaid. I know that's a dreaded term, but I mean, as in like you yourself didn't produce anything of value that could ever get close to recouping the investment. And essentially you were always relying on the fact that either another investor came along and put more money in, or it would shut down, and essentially you just have to hope that another guy goes, I'll try the same thing, but somehow for me it'll work. Because again, no one's ever found within this concept, no one's ever changed what the mechanism is, what the secret sauce is to make the money. It's always been this silly concept. And so I actually think, if anything, the media aspect just became like exaggerated even more in the Deserto Jake Lucky era, which is, for my money, this is why you will never have high quality esports journalism, because basically it has to be subsidized one way or another. Either you have to do utter trash work that is nothing you would be proud of to make the money, which can then pay for the good journalism, which is like, maybe that can work. But even then, like, if you ever go and look, the move now, people mistake this. It's not that Jake Lucky and Deserto just repost news. They have to almost try and make their repost of news that isn't theirs go viral. And if it doesn't consistently go viral, often exceeding esports, by the way, and individual games, if it doesn't do that, so you can already see that's not going to be a normal piece of news. That's going to be something salacious or about a streamer. Essentially, the real problem with this goes like this. The only method left that comes close to making any money in esports journalism is sort of like bad sensationalist headline rewrites of live stream fails. That's actually esports journalism now. Now, Richard might be the one unicorn who's done his Substack and actually can get paid just from that alone. And in theory, would never have to do that. But he is the exception that proves the rule thus far. And by the way, I'll just say this, another famous Esports Awards winner, Jacob Wolf, had to literally quit doing exactly that. He couldn't just live off a Substack with people paying for that. I haven't even got to the level where man's even close to that. And he launched it 2 months ago. So I will say, I actually think in this case, don't think because Richard figured it out, that works. I'd even say we could go into this later if you want. Quite frankly, I know Richard to some degrees had to do what I've done as well, which is another thing why we're to some degree cheating and you can't just copy our blueprint is we couldn't just sit in the cot and be journalists. We've had to also become like celebrity / stream figures / personalities who have sort of like their own reason for you to follow their content or to pay for you, but you're not paying for just the work there necessarily. So I think it's actually in a really messy and kind of like a bit of a dismal spot at the moment. You can see how the sweet spot was never even really a sweet spot. That's actually when we just tricked a load of outside people to waste tens of millions of dollars. That's the worst part as well, guys. If you knew the bags they gave out to Upcomer and some of the ESPN Esports, it was outrageous because it ties back into what Richard said as well. Probably the saddest thing of all is some of the people who made the most money ever out of esports journalism are editors. Nobody who's watching the show would ever be able to name. They've done nothing in esports except that site they worked for. And usually they weren't even a big shot before that. I'll give actually credit to that guy from Daily Dot. At least he was like a real fucking editor.
Yeah.
Most of the other bozos, it's almost like they themselves just finished almost in the newsroom, as it were, and then they just got, hey, here's your own vertical, and then they came to esports. And the worst thing is they'd be like overseeing people that were way better at writing than them, and like Richard says, they had all these weird, almost old newspaper journalism ideas of how it should work and what we're interested in and what we're covering. So it's been an absolute train wreck, and much like esports itself, the bubbles popped, and now nobody even knows the way back.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, I think it was the last month I was at Deserto before we left. I was like talking to the guys, the editors, and they were like they'd broken some internal records for like clicks on a piece across all social media. Okay. And I was like, well, what piece was it? And it was the announcement that Amaranth was selling beer made out of her vaginal yeast. Right, and they'd got millions of clicks on this, right, on reposting this. And I said, so like, well, how does that measure up against that piece I wrote? You know, because I think that month I'd done like a really in-depth investigation about like that ESIC whistleblower who wasn't a whistleblower, and and they were like, oh, that got about 10,000, 12,000 clicks. So at that point, I was like, well, you
just
can't.
Fuck all.
Yeah, we literally had the conversation. I said like I can't take. You know, they're paying me close to like 6 figures to be an editor at large for that. And I said like, yeah, we probably should have a talk. Really, like this is.
I never made that kind of money. I'll straight up. I'll tell you what I got paid. I got paid $40K at Sports Business Journal. That's what I got paid. And then I got a $10,000 raise when a job announcement came out. And I saw they were hiring another writer for $50 in the esports division.
Right. Okay.
Jesus Christ.
Classic esports.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
Not exactly mega money, guys, especially for somebody who's doing it full time.
Yeah, but they paid me right when I put it out there, right? But I always told everybody, I'm not here to hit a home run. I'm here to do good work. And that's why, again, and I can give you some numbers, Richard and Duncan, from what you guys were doing. When at VP Esports, we were making 20 to 30,000 in ad rev when you guys were with us. So that time at the end, we were on the cusp of being able to pay for all of us monthly. Right. I'm talking monthly ad rev, right? So we were between 20 and 35 in ad rev, only going up. And that's why when VP Game or whoever was owning it back then pulled the plug, I couldn't understand it. I didn't get it because we were literally on that path that you were talking about. And, who knows what it would have turned into today. But at least, like you said, during that kind of golden era, we were on the right path and doing good work. And that was what was most important.
Yeah.
Oh, by
Yeah,
the way,
I
I
mean,
do have a good joke for you as well. The joke goes like this, because I thought of this today. You know, in the modern day anyway, people do those things where if you make like a TikTok video, there's things that'll automatically transcribe it or even put a voice like reading out the basic story. The joke is, even though they didn't do this, they actually hired people who know the score. Esports did this, Deserto did this. A lot of these sites, like the joke of Deserto is, I used to actually work for Deserto and make mini documentaries. And here's the spoiler, guys. They just figured out that like the joke would be in the modern day, you actually would just have AI do this. But instead, it was cheaper than that. They just got some nobody. They just realized, wait, what if we just get a nobody and do one sort of like a Thorin piece for like 80% of the cost? And essentially, those get nearly all the same amount of views. That's just the way it works. So between the score, which literally did just copy all my videos, and then Deserto just sort of copied the formula, they just realized eventually as well, so this is why it doesn't work as an industry. Like, there's a really cheap way you can sort of like almost industrialize that and make like an assembly line that just produces like not as good as mine, but not that dissimilar if you're just a casual fan, sorts of bespoke content, essentially. So I also think in the modern day, even if they could afford to pay people, it'd sort of be people doing like not a very good job, like a low-level job. The actual big people, you either have to like ascend and do what Richard and just escape entirely, or actually you get stuck in a no man's land. Like eventually you'll be too expensive if you do really good work, so you won't be able to do that at the same time. But then you have to get the work published somewhere, so you have to take some gigs. So you're going to keep, it's why I don't blame Jacob, by the way, for leaving and going and doing other things. My problem is just the way he sometimes frames it, or some of the things he suggests are not possible, you know. But I do think there's a big reason why, if you go look at those winners of those awards, how many of them even work in esports journalism anymore? You know what I mean? It might just be us in this call at this point in time.
I've got like I've got a similar story to Kevin. This is like back in 2009. So the CGS had collapsed. I'd got a salary there and earned like, I don't know, it was like kind of like 2 promotions in like 2 weeks. They realized I wasn't just some fucking goon for hire, and they ended up putting me as like the head of European coverage. I went from being a staff writer to the head of European coverage in my first week, and then they put me on video as well. I was like the video guy. So I got 2 bumps in salary. But anyway, obviously that went under, and then I went to Gottfrag, right, which of course is now defunct. And I got Gottfrag nominated for the then Turtle Entertainment Esports Awards, another awards that was essentially taken over and used to promote the interests of, funnily enough, the same people who are doing it now. But anyway,
so what I referenced in my speech when I won, where I essentially used my speech to make fun of the fact that I never could ever have won one of those awards before.
Yeah,
now, little did I know that was about to reoccur about 3 years later anyway. So it turned out I was in the sweet spot. As it is.
So anyway, I got them nominated for an award for an article I wrote called "The Great Superfly Swindle," which was about, there was this guy. He had been known as a manager called Zanubis. He had ran a LAN event called Eurolan, which we all went to. And when we got there, he hadn't even hired the venue, and all the teams had turned up, and he just fucked off with the money. And then so anyway, a guy I know called Tony, he like hired the LAN out on a credit card. We had a tournament that didn't get finished, and then everyone just went back home, and that was the end of the LAN. Like nobody ever won it, right? So anyway, we did that, and then this guy had fucked off. We couldn't find him, but he turned up 2 years later running another esports org, and somebody said, that's fucking Zanubis, that's that cunt who ran that event. And so anyway, I did this whole investigative piece about it, ran it, published it, and it got Gottfrag nominated for one of these awards. Anyway, the editor at the time was a guy called Single Coil. I'm sure you remember him, Duncan. And there was a job saying, "Hey, apply for a paid job at Gottfrag." And I went, "Well, I'm a fucking shoo-in. I just got us nominated for an award." And I sent an email application in. No reply. This was October. And then I got a 3-line reply in January. I've worked for the site the entire time. And it was like, "Oh, if can volunteers please send us an example of your work?" And I was like, I work at the fucking site. Click on the front page, dickhead.
Did you
So
send him?
I sent him a fucking scathing email, right? And I've always kept the reply. It's only short. And I basically said, like, how much of a clown he was and how stupid it was to, kind of not even pay attention to your own staff. What does that say about quality control and all of this other stuff? And I definitely deserve some money because, I'm a qualified journalist. I'm giving my work away for free on your site. You're making money. You're getting paid. So why aren't I? And he sent me this reply, and I'll read it to you. And this is just so you understand the difference between the journalism that's gone bust by overspend in the modern era and the journalism that didn't pay you a penny in the original OG esports era. He said, "Where do you think this big pool of money is coming from? Do you honestly think that what you do generates enough interest or capital to pay someone full time? You are sadly mistaken. That is exactly why the CGS is dead and never had a chance. All you guys think someone is making money off of this, then in capitals, you are wrong. Not one league in this world is making profit. Every single league and website in esports is in the red. Without sponsors giving cash money, none will survive. I'm not sure what it is you do that you think you actually earn or generate for sponsors or advertisers that makes it worth their while. You expect to be paid regardless of whether your work creates anything of value in return for esports. You being a bona fide journalist should be the first to recognize that kind of attitude is silly. And if you were to have that attitude within the real world of journalism, you would be laughed at. Yeah, imagine that, journalists being paid. Your work was nothing special. Many before you have done it just as well, if not better, for nothing, because they love video games and realize that it's not their personal treasure chest or meal ticket. Stop taking advantage of those trying to build something that will last by thinking you deserve to be paid and saying you are insulted by being asked to volunteer. Frankly, this sport doesn't need people like you. You should seek employment in real journalism." That was an editor.
Told him the fuck out of his industry, but just way before scouts.
That was an editor of one of the most prominent esports websites at the time, iconic. Speaking to a volunteer employee that had just got him nominated for an esports award. That's what the industry was like back then. So, I mean,
Jay and Silent Bob and roll up to his door with that reply and go talk to that guy.
The funny thing is, I remember I've told that anecdote before and read that letter on one other time. It was back when me and Sir Scoots were talking, and he was going, "Yeah, you shouldn't really light up single coil for that, though." I'm like, that is the most disgraceful.
That's wild.
That is one of the most disgraceful responses I can ever think of. And again, if esports had been bigger. If esports had been bigger at the time, that's the kind of thing that would have been like a scandal in a Kotaku or something. It's just no one give a shit back then.
Oh, by the way, I didn't actually do the overview. I'll do it very briefly. Basically, On Gamers came around like 2013 into 2014. That lasted about 2 years or so. Famously had the Reddit ban and a bunch of reasons as to why it came on, moved on to some other company. There's a reason why that got closed down. Half of us were fired already, so there's no point at that point. Then after that, Yahoo did Yahoo Esports. Which initially was started with like Slasher, and then he brought in people like Kelsey Moser and a bunch of that was sort of the second crop of people who came into that one. Yeah, Launders did some stuff for him. Then you had the next year after that, ESPN launched ESPN Esports. At the same time, Yahoo did Yahoo Esports, which famously had Travis. Slasher again went from the Score, On Gamers to the Score to ESPN, and then ESPN also kind of got their own crew of people because they got Jacob Wolf, and then they got some like Theon, etc., who had also worked with Yahoo. And that was sort of like, you notice these are all like they keep like, this is how you know, even though they have loads of money, they don't want to spend it all on the big names. These editors, I also, as a theory, I'll just loop it in now, they never usually did come straight to me and Richard initially, be like, work for us, and you can be an editor. They also always wanted to sort of be like, I found the next person, and like they were going to make you the star. So even though everyone knew who Theon was, they would just think like, but if I hire him, then I'll make him a star. And so that's why, by the way, later they even did stuff like trying to make these people do video when maybe they were best.
We'll get into that.
Text at times. Yeah. Then after you had Yahoo and Esports, ESPN, obviously like in the last few years, you had Upcommer, which was the same concept again. So every single time someone comes along, massive investment, right out the gate, you hire editors for mega bucks. They usually get the six figures. a couple of people at high five figures. And the most amazing one was Upcomer, because the craziest thing about that one is, from some of the numbers I was hearing, that might have been the most money of all of them. And yet it was, maybe, if you look at the staff on it, maybe the worst of all of them. And it also, I don't even know, did it ever even produce that many big stories? It just felt like that one got really caught in no man's land and died fairly quickly, considering it paid some very big salaries out, it sounds like. So basically the 2010s were the sweet spot, where this same model just kept being done over and over again, of the mega site with the big names that was going to do, you know, what's the other concept was, it was always going to do every single game. It was the idea you were going to be, because in fact the joke is, even though one of them was called ESPN, the pitch was always exactly that line, that dreaded line, we're going to be the ESPN of esports. And the joke has always been, even ESPN couldn't manage that. So well, put it out there. Just put it out there.
I would argue they chose not to do that. And like, I do want to talk about ESPN, because I do think it goes to show that, because in my mind, like, you have two kind of like different vehicles for esports journalism. And I think there was a lot of potential to some of the big companies who have a lot of business expertise and business relationships coming into the scene. They just got, I think a lot of these projects got caught into giant bureaucracy with traditional sports and the traditional sports engines. And so they couldn't actually execute the plan. But before we do that, guys, I will say one thing that keeps us from being a bankrupt company is our sponsors. So if you care, and by the way, guys, what I'm going to do right now is exactly what I'm going to say ESPN should have done when they were running their own esports division, which is have us on the podcasts and the video making the money, right? Because this is how ESPN's model works, which I will get to in a little bit. But we have a new sponsor for the Four Horsemen this week, and that is a tool very relevant to journalism, which is a VPN. So this show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. So if you are a journalist, if you are Jake Lucky and you happen to find yourself in Saudi Arabia, you might want a VPN to anonymize your content. If you're in China, maybe it's a good time to get yourself a VPN. But if you're also interested in sports journalism, there's a very practical way to use a VPN, which is to access content. So I will say, I'm in Korea, and as you guys may know, Disney owns a lot of things. They own Hulu, they own Disney Plus, they own ESPN Plus. I personally really like a lot of the 30 for 30 documentaries. They're available on Disney Plus, where I am in Korea. Probably not available for you on Disney Plus, because you get sold a variety of packages. But with ExpressVPN, you can actually change your location and maybe use that Disney Plus to access sports journalism content, including 30 for 30s, which are quite good. I was actually watching a really good one on the 1983 quarterback draft, famously, that included like Dan Marino and John Elway. Super well made, very fun documentary. So if you guys like that kind of content, I would check out ExpressVPN. It works magnificently when I watch shows in the States, as we do for our culture shows. And if you are following along with Foreplay, for example, you will find that some of the movies we watch are available in certain countries, but not other countries. So if you're already paying for the service, go use ExpressVPN and watch the movies along with Thorin and myself and Richard for Foreplay. So ExpressVPN has been great. It works super well. You can get your money's worth at expressvpn.com/horsemen. That's plural, MEN. Don't forget to use our link at expressvpn.com/horsemen to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free when you sign up. So very practical.
By the way, I've told the story before that oftentimes one of the most frustrating things, like you're saying about accessing content from other regions, is if you ever try Googling like a boomer, like, where can I stream this movie? If you don't live in America, you are in for a nightmare, because it will always say it's on Netflix and you'll click it. But if you're in it'll just go like, it won't take you anywhere. It won't take you to a page on Netflix that has the movie, because essentially whoever wrote that site, it did it for Americans, right? Well, not only is there that angle, but I will even say they're getting that type of geo like fencing is only increasing. Like, I don't know how many people, obviously you'd have to be an expat to say this, but believe it or not, in the modern day, you can't even, I'm not joking, view like some of the clips of goals or like just scored in the Euros on Twitter if it's like a BBC clip or something. Like in the Netherlands, if I don't put a VPN on, it will actually say this video is not available in your location, even though for everyone else in the world, it's not broken, it does play, because they're getting more and more advanced, because obviously they sell the rights to all the sports. And so they're actually getting all the providers and platforms to black them out. So I will say, actually, as time increases, is, like, this might have been something in the past you thought, oh, it's nearly here or there, do I need a VPN? Actually, just to access loads of stuff, you will need it in the future. So yeah, I would say I'm using it more and more increasingly myself, Monty.
I mean, it's just like the combination of security and access. I mean, I'm already paying for this stuff, so I would like to be able to use it to its full extent, right? So anyway, great stuff. Thank you, ExpressVPN.
I want to tell a story like Richard. I've got a funny one as well. Go on.
All right. I want to talk about ESPN, but you do yours first, and we'll go back.
It's about ESPN. It's called relevant. It's on topic, money. So what happened was, here's why I didn't work for the other sites. So I worked for On Gamers, right? And after that, because I obviously had a falling out with certain people there, unsurprisingly, when those exact people like Slasher said, "Come and work at Yahoo Esports," like one, stop messaging me, and two, no, like, and I went and did it freelance, right? But what's funny is I did actually get, as I know Richard did, someone contacted us when ESPN Esports was launching them. They were like, "Hey, we'd like you to write an article," except that isn't what the email said, because then I might have done an article. In fact, people might know I famously published one and said I would have given this to ESPN, but they were rude. And what happened was I got an email that was mental. My email, remember, this isn't like 2016 when I'm already like a 15-year established veteran who's done all these things. I got an email that said, "We'd really like you to collaborate and write an article with Slasher for ESPN Esports." Now, the obvious thing I just replied was, "Why would I need Slasher?" It's like, I think I'll just write my own article, mate. Like, and what's bizarre is that in itself, by the way, gives you a clue as to what some of these sites were like. Essentially, as far as I can tell, they wanted me to write an article where I would, like the fucking Family Guy sketch of how Good Will Hunting was written. I would just write an article. Then I don't know what Slasher would do. I don't know, fucking put a caption on a photo, and then we just both share a byline. And it's like, is this what ESPN is going to be like? So, because in that scenario, it's like you've decided Slasher's your 1A. Your star player, and you want me to prop him up in that scenario. So it just shows what a weird mentality these sites had, because in that scenario, like, I just thought to myself, I can have my own byline though, mate. Why would I go that angle? So I always thought as well, one of the biggest hindrances to those sites, as I alluded to, was like a really weird type of gatekeeping from the editorial staff. Like, one of the most misunderstood parts is, with all the millions they wasted, they didn't end up with loads of awesome content. It's not like they wasted it, but it's like, hey, look at what we got though. Like, we did get those great documentaries. Actually, the saddest thing is they tended to spend it in all the wrong places and on the people who didn't generate that much. Like, it wasn't like Richard got $500,000 from all these people. Like, no, like, some people got maybe a year's salary, some of the better people. Most people I know didn't work at more than one or two of these sites. They just realized the game eventually and moved on. So sadly, I actually found those sites to be very cynical, even for my first encounter with a bunch of them.
I turned down ESPN quite famously.
Wow.
Just to say that, because I'd already signed with Turner. I did the interview before they appointed Slasher.
That's fair.
And they were, and got to the kind of minutia stage where they were like going, and obviously your tweets, you're gonna have to.
Oh God,
we're gonna have to get you an intern for that. And I said, why? What's wrong with my tweets? And he went. This was a tweet from, I believe, April 2014. You should go and drink bleach. Do you think that's the kind of thing an editor of a site like ESPN should be saying? I'm like, I don't give a fuck, mate. I'll say what I like, actually, if that's all right with you. So yeah, so I actually got to the stage. I even got to the stage where I said, look, I'm not going to take the job. I don't want to work for you. Even if we ever did in the future, no one would ever control my Twitter. That would be a deal breaker. And then they were like, well, can you? What's that? Sorry.
You know that made them mad, right? Because remember, I told you guys this story a couple times. When we were talking, the freaking editors from ESPN called me and said, "Why are you hiring them? Why are you talking to them?"
Yeah.
And I was like, because they're the best in the business. I'm like, what are you doing?
mean, yeah, because I had a couple. There was a couple. It was like ESPN, and I think I interviewed with the LA Times as well when they were going to get into esports journalism. And it's just like, I don't know, man. The way they talk to you, like, they come in like, "Hey, we're gonna make you," like, and it's like, I've been good for 20 years.
Exactly.
Like, I've survived when there was no money in this industry. Not just survived, I've thrived. I've turned what is essentially a hobby into a very good living. So why would I need ESPN? You know, like, why would I need?
Exactly.
Why would I need the LA Times? They never quite got that. But yeah, they would come in and, they would offer you these positions, and they think, you're going to be blown away. And I'm just like, no, it's okay, actually. Yeah, and they don't like it. They never do.
I do want to talk about the business model because so there have been a few things, guys, about this. So one of them has been there's been kind of two entities. Well, actually, technically, there's been three. There's been the community sites that have come in that have had no expectations, that have built around a lot of volunteer or low paid work, which is basically what everybody did back in the day. I mean,
grassroots and top down, right?
I mean, I did this too on WC
Yes.
Replays. I posted news on Warcraft 3, the professional scene, when I was first starting out in esports. So I've done a lot of that. I did event
this is what Team
coverage.
Liquid was, Monty. It was all just volunteers doing it from the forums, right?
Yeah. So Team Liquid very famously was the website with the community forums and everything like that. That's where they got their start.
People don't know that's where Fion came from, Stu, Wax It. All these people came from that forum.
Wax Angel, you know, basically Team Liquid was a clan, right? But an unpaid, an unpaid team, not the entity that makes $60 million a year in revenue that you see now. That was mostly a community hub pre-Reddit, where the forums were for StarCraft Brood War. And then later on for League of Legends and for Dota and for some other games before Reddit really took over. And then we have the VC-funded sites, which were the ones that were expecting a much more immediate return and were paying all these outlandish salaries. And then we have the established media outlets. And this is where ESPN comes in, where they can afford to lose money because they actually have, they have very big sports editors involved. They have a system that they have a way of monetizing, right? Potentially they have sponsors that they could extend over to esports.
Oh, sure.
They have advertisers. So the real question is, why didn't ESPN work? Because I know factually the numbers from the viewership of the articles and the clicks on ESPN were pretty good. And I think what was so weird to me about ESPN was something you alluded to earlier, Thorin, which is that so they kind of got stuck in this no man's land where they had enough money to hire a staff, including names like Jacob Wolf, that were breaking a lot of roster moves, which is what ESPN is famous for. But what people don't understand is that when ESPN breaks a roster move with Roy or whatever in the NBA, that isn't how they make money, guys. How they make money is the whole fucking video news cycle after that. It's Stephen A. Smith, right, talking about
Talking Heads.
Yeah, it's the talking heads, because that is the core business model of ESPN, guys, because they actually lose money doing like NFL media rights contracts. They do not make money doing that. But what that allows them to do is on Monday Night Football to advertise these talk shows. Because here's the thing, talk shows are very cheap compared to producing an NFL game. It's, a couple people, some producers in a studio.
Can we be honest? Can we be honest here and say, who did you want to hear from that was on that staff? Did they?
That's where we're getting, Kevin. That's where we're getting.
Sorry, okay, my bad. Great writers, but
yep.
Go ahead. Sorry, Monty.
So, you're totally right. I mean, and this is where it falls down. It's like, what was so weird was that from the outside, I was looking at that and I'm like, ESPN, you have a good business model, but you are not even following your own business model. Your business model is you have the leak journalists, and those guys are the ones who are getting the scoops and doing the journalism. But in concert with that, you have, okay, we're going to leak it now. And then you could ESPN, because ESPN Esports is on the internet. Why don't you have a show going live that immediately discusses this after the leak? You could coordinate all this. You have the information. And so, I would have loved to have seen Jacobs Wolf's reporting with talk show hosts, but they got caught in this no man's land where they had enough money to hire the writers, but not enough money to do the video production. But it was going to be the video production that ultimately made the money, right? And justified the expenditure of the whole thing. And what was so weird is ESPN knows this. They knew it. And yet the editors and the people in charge couldn't actually convince the esports or the sports bureaucracy at ESPN, the corporate bureaucracy, to give them the money they needed to do it. So eventually the whole thing collapsed because they tried to double up their writers into on-camera personalities. And I have a lot of respect for the people who worked at ESPN. I mean, Emily Rand has become a good on-camera personality, but at the time she was real rough, guys. And a lot of the people who are writers don't necessarily have the same skills to translate to entertaining talk, sports radio content, right?
I bet you put it this way, the short answer, if you'd asked what could they have done, is unironically just hire Richard as the editor-in-chief in 2016 or something. If you'd have done that, you'd have had a chance.
the thing I always had was they never wanted me to be the editor because they always were like, "Oh, you're a controversial figure," and it's like, well,
right.
I mean, they were owned by Disney, so
Yeah, Skip Bayless
but
isn't controversial either, I guess, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's what I mean. But it was like that at every single site. It was like that at every single site. Every site I ever worked for, they wanted the content because they were going, "Oh yeah," it was kind of like that bit. If you've ever seen the movie Barton Fink, where they're going, "We need somebody to give us that Barton Fink feeling," and then when Barton Fink's he's like got writer's block, and he says, "This might be the best thing I've ever written. What do you think?" And he's going, "This is trash. You think I can't get another 10 writers that can give me that Barton Fink feeling?" And it's like, it was kind of like that. Like, basically, they wanted Richard Lewis content. What they didn't, until they didn't. And what they didn't want was me to be able to go, well, if I think this will do well, I can get like 5 other writers and I can get them to produce similar content. And then we'll have 5 times what I could do, right? And they go, no, we're not interested in that. We couldn't have it all be Richard Lewis style content. That wouldn't work. So yeah, that's kind of like what I went through. The ESPN one is kind of like, I mean, that's like a watershed moment in esports coverage, I think. It's definitely one worth talking about a little bit, because ultimately it's like Monty says, it was such a spectacular failure. And I know internally,
but it didn't have to be. It just got like, I just don't understand why ESPN did it the way they did, because they just half-assed it, right? If they shouldn't have done it at all, or they should have actually just spent more money, because I think it could have been sustainable.
Together, the problem, Monty, is they took their model, which at the time, remember, Skip Bayless used to be with Stephen A. Smith. Those were the 2 big names.
Oh yeah,
they took their model that was based around have Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless argue about it, and then, as Richard pointed out, refuse to hire Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
What do you want at that point in time? You can't just put like some milk toast guy on, like, hey, I don't know about that movie. No one's going to watch. Like, he has to beat Stephen A. Smith.
But this is what I mean about the failure on the editorial level. And it's interesting because a lot of the editors that have failed at these sites, they've got jobs now elsewhere. I'll talk about one specific one when we get to the Saudi segment of esports journalism. But like, I know editorially, people like Jacob and all the other, and people like Fion, they were being told, like, you're doing a good job because we're getting all of these clicks because you're on the front page of Reddit all the time. And it's like, okay, that's part of it. Like, yeah, we've got the roster moves locked down. Nobody breaks roster moves before us. Hey, let's make a podcast around that. That didn't do very well. But it's like, they never like actually realized like how to kind of level up and get to a stage where you sort of essentially have to create a community around the content itself. You have to be a regular viewer or a regular engager. It can't just be these one-off stories. Because what do you do when the roster season isn't happening? What do you do?
I watch Richard Lewis for Richard Lewis. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I watch Richard Lewis to watch Richard Lewis. You're a personality. Right. You're entertaining. You're fun, right? ESPN's editorial staff had a bunch of introverts that were just really good at their job that weren't camera ready by any means. That's why I want to say Arda Okal, I think that's his name, the NHL guy. Yeah, he came in for a little while, but then was like, no, this ain't for me, right? And then you saw him go right back. But
I mean, I know Arda, and like Arda also, part of that was that NHL was his passion, and he got a really good job doing NHL at ESPN. So I don't think it wasn't because he didn't care about esports. You're right, Kevin. They brought him in because they needed more on-camera juice.
He was the polish, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes. And who was left? Who was out there that could literally do that job other than, I mean, the guys that are in this room right now, to be real honest? There was really nobody out there because we were such babies at the time. No history, no training. Esports hadn't been around for that long. Who's going to do it? I mean, skilled editorial. But that's why I think even, Darren, the editor, who was probably the most charismatic person on the staff, was starting to do video, and they shut it down, I think. So I just didn't know who they were going to have to do it.
I agree. Out of all the people, Darren was probably the best on camera, and he was he was supposed to be the editor of the project.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So that's what I mean. That they just weren't ready.
Yeah.
But
it's also as well, like, right. I mean, let's also talk about the spectacular failure of using your resources. Like, put it this way, when Turner did E-League, and I know it's not journalism, but it's just an example. The very first week of the very first show, we were at CES in Vegas. We did cross promotion with inside the
Where
NBA.
that Shaq burn happened,
Yeah, which is where the Shaq burn happened. That put us over the top. By the time we got to Atlanta to tape the show for real, we were on fucking billboards in downtown next to the Adult Swim building. We were on commercials going out on TBS.
We used to put aeroplanes, remember, on the fucking in-flight entertainment. It would have an E-League thing.
Well, because Delta and Turner, obviously both being Atlanta companies, we were on Delta in-flight. So, I mean, when you think about all the fucking cross-promotion they did to just get us out there, you're fucking ESPN. Why isn't Jacob Wolf, like, talking with, back when they had, like, Helwani, for example, or somebody like that? Why aren't you using your bigger properties to say, hey, we got this esports property, we're doing good work over there as well? And obviously, as I will add, there's also a failure of content, because if you did, let's say I did a promotion with a UFC podcast or a soccer podcast or whatever it might be, right? Well, okay, yeah, I like the cut of that Jacob Wolf's jib. I'll go check out his work. No, I don't. This guy has joined this. Is that a team in league? I don't understand it. You have to already be following the scene. What's your evergreen content? What's your evergreen content? What's your equivalent of a 30 for 30 piece in writing? Even Fion's didn't quite meet that, because Fion, again, was writing about stuff that was for the enthusiast.
You had to be a fan already, definitely.
Yeah, what's there for the fucking casual? Yes. What's a really compelling story? And it's like, this is why I don't do it now.
Some of that, because obviously, like, Mina Kimes did do the Faker piece for the ESPN magazine. But before she was
a good
good
joke would be, Monty, if you think how much money they must have paid to fly her to Korea and do all that, it never ever could have come close to paying for itself. That was a literal waste of money.
Not at all. But think about it this way, right? Like, this is what I mean about editorial failure, right? If our model is breaking roster moves, and that's going to generate the bulk of the traffic, that's going to keep the suits quiet, sure, let's do that. And maybe Fion's a part of that too. But who is right? Like, what percentage needs to be something that's going to capture an audience, be a really compelling story, maybe get promoted in the mainstream media? Like, wow, what an insane story. Like, every so often, you get like the fucking story about the glizzy gobbler who's broke the fucking hot dog record, and everyone talks about competitive eating for a few months. Where's the equivalent of that? Outside of rubbernecking about TI prize pool, what's the equivalent in esports? There just isn't one. And that's and that is an editorial failure. And that's where ESPN could have basically the esports division at ESPN was just like an unsightly tumor growing out the side of a failing sports network that people just pointed at and whispered about. It didn't really. It never felt like it was ESPN for real. And that's why it is the great irony in the industry that everybody wanted to be the ESPN of esports, but not really. ESPN, it's not just that ESPN couldn't be the ESPN of esports, it's that ultimately they didn't want to. They didn't try.
Yeah, they didn't try is really the thing. Like, they really half-assed it, which is disappointing, because I think had they... I agree with you, Richard, on the principle that ESPN is dying, but I do think that there was a profitable, potential medium there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, ESPN's dying for a variety of reasons, and again, I'll just knock it back. It's editorial failures. It's all any publication lives or dies by who's in the editorial room and who's making the fucking decisions and who's making the calls. The credibility crisis in journalism isn't because fucking Jeff Bezos decides he wants to run the Washington Post, right? Like, it's an issue. It's an issue when wealthy people want to control and capture media for their own machinations because media doesn't make money, so it has to be a loss leader, right? That is a problem. Sure, we can talk about that. But when you editorially decide to run certain types of stories, and then you get them wrong, and you get them wrong again and again and again because you're blinkered by your own bias. When you do this, when you make a decision to change your masthead to something cringe like "Democracy Dies in Darkness," like these are editorial decisions that kill your fucking publication. And in esports, people are like, there's a roster move that just happened an hour ago. Who's writing that up? Well, it doesn't fucking matter, mate. No one's going to read it. I could literally put the headline, player X joins team Y, and then put that fucking ipsa liquor, dipwer, Latin bullshit in there.
People never know you put the Latin
and it would get the exact same clicks. It was that's the reality. But editors used to be like furious with you. You'd be on a Slack group and an editor would go, "How did this happen? How did this roster move happen an hour ago and no one's written it up?" And it makes no difference, mate. Don't stress. Go back to your fucking coffee and bagel. Shut the fuck up. Some of us are trying to actually, break stories. The thing that will always have value. The thing that can't be. Like, by the way, now that AI's here, right? I've got to laugh. I see all these esports journalists going like, AI's going to take my job. Good. If it can, you don't deserve to have one. That's my opinion. Like, it's not like being an artist. Like if you're a reporter, how can an AI report? Think about it. How can it report something? How can it break a story? How can an AI
the internet, right?
Because how can an AI
that already exists, right?
Right. It simply can't do it. An AI can't juggle a source network or ascertain the veracity of information. So I'm good. Like, AI can't replace me. I'm not rewriting other people's work. An AI can fucking do that for you. And you know what? Yeah, maybe some of these publications would have survived if we had AI 10 years ago. We didn't have to pay your fucking useless ass 60 grand a year. So, I mean, listen, it's all editorial. Like the failure is editorially. And if you want an example of like how much you can get out of so little, Kevin is a great example at the Sports Business Journal. Pretty much kept their entire esports division alive for like, I mean, how long were you by yourself, Kev? Was it like a year, 2 years?
Yeah, a year and a half about.
Right. So he ran an entire division, which, by the way, was going out as a newsletter, and to attract the Mark Cubans, people like that in the world who might have a vested interest in esports. Oh, over my breakfast, I read the Sports Business Journal esports division from this young, spry reporter, Kevin Hitt. Right. But if you want to see like what you can do with just one salary, Kevin's an example. James Fudge is an example. He runs the Esports Advocate pretty much by himself. It's like him and one other guy. And by the way, not that he'd accept it. He is hands down Journalist of the Year this year, and hands down that is Publication of the Year this year.
Agreed.
Yep.
It's not even close. By the way, no one has come close. So
Agreed.
I mean, that's what you can do with just one salary. Now, again, why did it take people like Kevin, people like James, having to essentially become their own editors that actually create the things of value, and then the actual editorial board go, oh well, you know what though, it's on a bit of a downward trend, this esports thing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up a gaming division dedicated to the 2K NBA league. Like, fucking beat me up. Like, those guys, by the way, make $250,000 a year. Some of these people. Like, there isn't an editor at one of these big media companies that's on less than six figures. They can't afford to be. They live in New York. They're on 150 and probably live with a roommate at 40 years old. It's embarrassing, but they get paid so much fucking money and they contribute so little to the ecosystem, and they just regurgitate bad ideas that kill publications stone dead. That's where you want to start. You want to shake up. It ain't boots on the ground reporters. I mean, yeah, we got problems now because no one wants to be Richard Lewis. I mean, Richard Lewis doesn't want to be Richard Lewis. Let's be real. But, no one wants to be Richard Lewis. They do want to be Jake Lucky. They do want to be a guy going to events and getting free T-shirts and deleting tweets when Dr. Disrespect says, you better, it's not a big deal, Jake. Watch yourself. They want to be that. They don't want to be the iconoclastic, fighting everybody all the time just to tell the truth so you can get shit on by the people who benefit from the truth being out there. Nobody wants to do that. I don't blame you. But yeah, we need an editorial shakeup. That's the issue. That's always
Let me just say this. The people that are here today, this is what I've learned about you. you three have what 98% of the world doesn't have, which is this gene that you're willing to risk. You have more of a you are willing to risk for what is right. And
Maybe
Tom,
stupidly.
no, you're not wrong there. But Tom Brokaw said the greatest generation, right? So World War II guys that just went out there because of duty. They went out there because it was their duty to go fight for their countries, right or wrong. The people here that I'm looking at, you guys are not afraid to risk, but we don't have those people anymore. They're not being either created through nurturing or allowed to explore. We have people that just are allowed to say dumb shit and not be held accountable for it. And you guys...
And I agree, Kevin. I think esports fans should thank me for my service. I absolutely do agree with that. I couldn't agree. Where's my fucking medals, guys?
Three of them behind you somewhere. You got three of them behind you, Rich. No, but and I'm being serious. You guys could say just the most outlandish shit if you felt like it, and you don't, because you have that level of integrity and you're not afraid to risk for what's right and holding those people accountable. And as soon as people start seeing that again and getting past the Jake Luckys of the world and the others, then I think esports would be a even better place, not just for, the fans needing or wanting to know what happened, but I'm talking about the industry at large, whether it's, why they're doing the leagues, the rule sets, the players, and all those things. We got to have more, not less, because it's going to run itself into the ground, in my opinion.
Well, Kevin, it's really, for all of us, like, we remember not getting the bag, and, it's hard to fight against us because we will take that fight, because we were all here before the bag existed, and we were never here for the bag in the first place. So like, it's cool when the bag comes, but that's not why, it's why people do it now. It's
exactly.
Why he's doing it. But if you spent years and years and years and years and years not getting the bag, but still pressing on, you're not just going to stop.
Yeah, that was my coaching journey. My coaching journey, I coached for probably 10 to 15 years for like $4,000 a year. But it was a full-time job, and I did it because I loved it. And now it's paying dividends, right? But I'm saying same thing. But like they're clout chasers, and there's that certain endorphin sort of rush that they see all the views and all the likes, and that gets them going. That's their motivation. It's not to tell a good story and inform their audience of what's actually happening and make the place better. They're just getting off because of all these people acknowledging them in some way. That's how I feel it's going.
I know this is nothing to do with the podcast, but I do just want to say someone just shot at Donald Trump at a rally and he got clipped.
Okay.
What?
Are you for real?
Like, got not clipped as in dead, as in it winged him, apparently.
But you're not kidding?
No. Like,
holy shit.
It's like, like someone just shot at him. Secret Service just threw him on the floor, and he's got blood coming out his ear, and he did somewhat ridiculously did the Black Panther salute as he got carried off.
I think people thought that was going to happen 4 years ago, but that's
that's something
unbelievable.
That's fucking crazy. Yeah, sorry.
Unbelievable.
That's all right.
My Discord just popped up. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Keep your post. The crazy times that we live in. Anyway, back to the world of esports. So yeah, I mean, look, to your point, and we can use the segue into the Saudi thing. I think one of the issues, broadly speaking, about esports journalism has been, like, you talk about the risk and you talk about taking the risk. Well, again, editorially, and not just editorially, but the people who fund the publications, they don't want to take risk because obviously risk ruins relationships. And as we alluded to at the start, you have to kind of be good with the publishers because you want access to the games, because access to the game gives you content. You want access to events because access to events gives you content. Everybody is encouraged to play nice. I mean, quite literally, that is the phrase you will hear a lot as a journalist. Let's all play nice. And what play nice means is do our bidding, never say anything critical about us. Because as I've talked about many times with Riot, many times with Activision Blizzard, they're big babies. They are babies. Mark Merrill is a fucking man-child. Like, he cannot take any criticism whatsoever. And if any comes his way, there must be reprisals for it. It's our world. We built it. We built the game. Therefore, everything that's tangentially around it is kind of ours too. And that's the attitude. And so immediately what happens is when you're a journalist, you're put into this world where you'll have stories and you'll run them up editorially and they'll go, yeah, let's not do that one. Well, why not? Why not? Why can't we do a story about Mark Merrill being boosted in his own video game while simultaneously handing out competitive bans for being boosted? Why can't we do that? Well, yeah, I don't think that one's going to go over very well, is it? Well, it's not meant to. That's never a factor in the story. And so what's happened is that attitude, unfortunately, is now metastasized into the industry, and it's now somehow tied up in the money. Like back then, it was just tied up in the access. Now it's tied up in the cash itself. And so obviously, again, the Saudis, they don't want people saying bad things about Saudis. They don't want every article to be viewed about their Esports World Cup to be viewed through the lens of sports washing, which is the only lens it can be viewed through. They want positive articles about it. If you cannot do that by intimidation, which is another, it will take away your access, will revoke this, will revoke that, then you just objectively pay for it. And they've done this, like, Esports Insider, for example, have been sponsored, I believe, by Kadir, and they've done a number of interviews where they haven't necessarily disclosed that they are sponsored by Kadir, and they say, yeah, but we interviewed Prince Faisal, but that was nothing to do with the promotional work for Kadir. And it's like, it all comes out of the same pot, guys. I don't know. Probably a little disclosure is not going to hurt. And then obviously you fast forward to Webedia. Webedia is the company that owned the original Esports World Cup brand. I said the original. I mean, the kind of third iteration of that. They bought it. It was in their portfolio. The reason why Ralph Reichart and the Saudis bought the Esports World Cup brand wasn't to use it or to get its credibility. It was so it couldn't come back at a later date and create confusion as to who is the definitive Esports World Cup. But Webedia is a portfolio of news websites. Guess what stories they run about the Esports World Cup? Guess what they say about it? Well, it's all positive. It's all glowing reviews. It's pay-to-play coverage.
I can't imagine how frustrated you guys are year after year. Again, because remember, I came into this thing in probably 2014, 2015. And the things that I noticed about what you guys talked about a lot was conflicts of interest and, the best people getting the jobs, right? Meritocracy, things like that. The amount of conflict of interest in the esports space that just a normal person can just take a look and go, are you joking? And then to see the defense of such things, you go, are you fucking crazy? Like, what rational person can go, you are literally sponsored by the World Cup or by the Saudi Arabian Federation, Rolling Stone? How can you even begin to think that you can be unbiased in your reporting, period?
But it's getting even worse because now we have teams like Falcons who refuse to disclose their ownership. Spoiler, the ownership is the Saudi government. Sure. Yeah, they don't have to, but the ownership is the Saudi government, and now they're competing for a prize pool from the Saudi government, right? In tournaments that are operated by the Saudi government. So
you guys talked about that so much. Remember ESL? That was like your big. What was it? I want to say Astralis and Fnatic, Astralis, owned by the same company or whoever it was. Yeah, in the same tournaments. And you guys are like, do you not see? You own the tournament. You own the team. You own the invites. So you literally could invite who you want. Yes. Put them in the most favorable position to win money, and then. And they got these deals with HLTV, so if you got invited to places, you got more points, and the players were paid more money because of higher. You guys been calling that shit out for years, and people still to this day go, huh? And it just blows my fucking mind, guys. Sorry, I get.
I mean, you could even use
that
that example now. Like, here's the example that you'd use in the modern day to put all the pieces together. So there could be a world, it doesn't exist now, but let's imagine that the Saudis got really cynical like that. And they decided, right, you know what? Anyone who speaks against us, soft blacklist them. Don't ever say publicly to anyone, even private. Don't even say they're blacklisted. Just don't reply to them if they ask for an email or comment on an article. They could essentially, assuming that Saudis own the Falcons and ESL and all the other things, there's a world where Falcons could play at one of their tournaments run by ESL. They could then only be interviewed by an RS gaming person, which is Rolling Stone's Vertical, which is owned by the Saudis. And in that scenario, like, it's a completely hermetically sealed ecosystem. Like, how does anyone who's not paid by the Saudis get in there? And that's in one team. So at the moment, it's not a big deal because it's one team. But what happens when either publicly or privately, again, remember, we might the part people really don't understand that's really insidious about the Saudis is they haven't even started to play the game at the 10 out of 10 level yet. If they choose to invest via like hedge funds into companies, we will never know which properties they own. So they can even do all this, by the way, and not make it overt like that, where I could know that they own that and that and that and that. Eventually, suddenly it could just be, it's like, basically, it's like what they say used to happen in East Germany if you got censored. It's not that anyone said, like on a billboard, this person can't work. It's that if you ever applied to be an artist and editor, no one would ever give you a job. And magically, same person, I can't do it, mate. Sorry, can't happen. And you would just, like, by a conspiracy of silence, have no job. And like they didn't throw you in a gulag. You just could never get anything out there. So I feel like we're not that far from, there's a world where they just close the fence and then everyone outside of it just isn't part of this ecosystem.
It's built on
distribution, everything. Go for it, Kev.
Yeah. It's built on potential of conflict. Conflict of interest is built on the potential of what could actually happen. And that's not unreasonable to think that that could happen. And people don't understand that's not a conflict of interest. It hasn't happened. You idiots. Conflict of interest is to stop it from happening in the first place. And people don't get that. That's what infuriates. When I see them responding to you guys about some of the things, well, it hasn't happened. Just, oh my God, go away. You literally don't know anything about conflict of interest, and just leave. It just pisses me off that you guys have called this out for years and people still say, well, it hasn't happened yet. How do you know? We don't. It probably has happened in some way, shape, or form. We just haven't been privy to it yet.
Oh.
Well, I mean, again, I was talking about like the editors. It's kind of funny. There's people that have worked at these like failing publications that are now, I'm pretty sure would have morally objected to, anything, sexist or, any kind of homophobia. And now they're carrying water for the Saudi regime over in PR. Yeah, right. Well, obviously, like there was the editor at Upcomer, and I think he was an editor at ESPN as well. Like Sean Morrison.
Yep.
Remember this guy?
The ESPN guy also, yeah.
Yeah. Sean Morrison is now at what they call JSA. And JSA are the people doing the PR for the Esports World Cup, and it's like, again, it's fucking fantastic. If you look at some of his tweets, like they're so right on. Like I bookmarked a ton of them, like just in case, for example, he had one where he was talking about the ESPN like style sheet, and he was going, we don't use the word homophobic when referring to the use of anti-gay language at ESPN. So, yeah, exactly. He got the joke. He said it's too good, and it goes, it's in our style guide, in part because homophobic implies fear, whereas anti-gay says what it is: language that is directed at belittling or demeaning gay people. And this is the guy who now,
because technically, I don't know if MBS and the Saudis are actually irrationally afraid of gay people. I just know they're anti-gay people. So in a way, he actually was right. He sort of elucidated better in the language.
They may not fear; they just may hate.
True. Yeah.
So I mean,
they just don't believe they should exist. That's all. They don't hate
it's like the interesting dynamic now is Rolling Stone are going to make all of the same mistakes that every other publication has, but they're now essentially
first. So check mark one on the list.
And phobic doesn't mean afraid. It means in.
That's all I want to know.
Yeah, phobic doesn't mean afraid. Phobic means, if you're hydrophobic, right? You just don't interact with it. It means a strong dislike, right? And people
But
trying
but it's virtue signaling, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously.
That's the point.
Yeah.
He's picking among the fucking sand out of somewhere, but then on the other hand, there's a literal sand dune called Saudi Arabia behind him, and he goes,
Yeah.
I think everything over there is fine, though. It's all taken care of over there. But back to the
So anyway, they're now essentially too big to fail, and that is the other aspect of it. That is what they're banking on. That ultimately they never have to produce anything of any value whatsoever because they are being paid for in their entirety by the Savvy Games group for the purposes of. We need big mainstream publications that people respect to say positive things about us. Now, listen, Rolling Stone for me is a busted news in media because I'm a media head. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the media. I'm interested in politics, particularly where those two things intersect. And Rolling Stone for me, they were out with that absolute outrageous, fake rape story that they ran. Yeah. It's one of the most heinous examples of journalistic malpractice of all time in modern American media. And so for me, I don't view them as a big name, but to the normies and the business class, and the LinkedIn class, they are. By the way, this entire project, the Esports World Cup, it is just for the LinkedIn class of esports fans. It's not for you. It's not organic. It's not, interesting in any way. It's not for us aficionados in the space. It's just for people who want to post on LinkedIn about how they went to Riyadh and had a really nice business dinner with the royal family. The whole tournament is that. So Rolling Stone is an example, but this is also why they wouldn't give interviews to endemic esports like orgs, they wouldn't talk to even an HLTV, for example. They would talk to The Verge, right? This is what people like that. This is how they would get their story out there. They talk to Wired. They weren't interested in interacting with any of the endemic esports people anymore because endemic esports people might have a thing or two to say about what they are doing endemically to esports. We're all frozen out. And Duncan, you're talking about the soft blacklist. That's already happened to me. I was the first name out. I'm gone. I don't even think I could, let's say I wanted to attend an event to see a friend or whatever. Not that I wouldn't risk it because there is certainly a suitcase out there with my fucking name on it. I can't go now. They won't give me any comment on any story I run about them, and they don't care. They don't care because they know in the grand scheme of things, is Richard Lewis bigger than Rolling Stone? No. Is he bigger than The Verge? No. Is he bigger than Wired? No. That's fine. They've already won then. They've already won. If all of us combined, all the remaining journalists in the space do a full court press against the Saudi Arabian takeover of esports, it's not going to move the dial at all. Just like, I've got other colleagues, my colleague of mine, Kareem Zidane. He's the go-to guy on Chechnyans and people like Kadyrov and stuff like that in the UFC and Dagestan, and talking about all the corruption over there. He's the go-to guy for that. But trust me, he's never getting invited to a UFC presser. He's on the outs. He's writing about real shit. So it's really fucked up kind of where we're at, because ultimately they've won by virtue of they've just bought a bigger megaphone, and anything we say is going to get droned out by, oh look, they drive now, and that's that. We've lost. We could unearth a million scandals. There's no way back from this for as long as the Saudis are interested in the world of video games and esports and are paying for coverage. That's it.
Do people understand how important you are, though? I mean, the press in general. I mean, again, the whole reason of the press, right, is to hold the powerful accountable for, to check and balance that, right? I mean,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, but again, so it is an adversarial type relationship where, what is it? How much billions do they have that we don't? But at the same time, this is the sucky part, right? If we quit, holy shit, they literally could do anything they want. And so again, those people that are willing to risk are the people that those out in esports and fandom, and even again in the industry, they just need to pay attention to esports journalists, because you guys, you've been there, you have nuances that you know that they don't. You can keep them from repeating the same mistakes that they've made in the past. And so it just kills me, because as we know, all they care about is money, and they'll do whatever they want to get that money. Whereas we just want to see, a fair and a great product that is entertaining, that people love and enjoy, that is beneficial. Like, there's so many cool things about esports. Like, Monty, I think that's why you went into ownership in the beginning, right? Because you saw how cool it could be and how awesome a product it was going to be. And I don't know, man. I just feel like if we quit because we feel like, the goalposts are so far away, it'd just be bad for, the world.
I don't think anybody's going to quit. We just realized we can't actually stop what's going on, unfortunately.
I'm sort of like halfway there. I've been trying to write an article for a week about esports, and it's just like, it just sickens me. Like, I actually physically recoil. I get like 200 words in, and I just can't do it anymore. Like, I really struggle with it now. I mean, like, over on my Substack, if you look at like the last 3 things I published, I don't think they're about esports. We just came off June, which is the most nauseating kind of example of how far esports has fallen, where it was like, I went, and the article that I've struggled to finish is I went through and I tallied up every esports org that's in the Esports World Cup, Esports World Cup club program, and whether or not they posted about Pride this year. And Cloud9, no. Toronto Defiant, no. Furion, no. Space Station, no. TSM, no. Gen G, no. Vitality, no. Fnatic, no. And it's like all of these people had done it in the past, and they just didn't do it this year. And it's like, I'm going to write this up, and all that's going to happen is everyone's going to, a number of things are going to happen. The bigots are going to go, yeah, well, don't stick pride down my throat, mate. Okay, yeah, that's not the point of what we're doing. Okay, fine. The fans that are already cynical about the Saudi stuff are going to go, yeah, kind of expected that. The orgs are going to say nothing. And ultimately, the dial isn't going to move. And it's like, another part of what the sports washing project is doing is it demoralizes journalists. It makes you not even want to bother, because what is it for? And like, I'm 100% at that point. Like, I had much bigger designs and bigger plans for June, but ultimately, what more can be said than these people chose money over principles, and they're guiding the entirety of the industry in that direction? And how many more times can I say that? How many more times can I write that down, put it out there, and everyone go, yeah, that is true. And that's it. There's so many more interesting things to be writing about, things that actually, inspire me. And I couldn't even imagine like trying to cover this beat in any kind of conventional sense. It's like, it's just a joke. It's like, it's so obvious what's happened, and it's so obviously wrong what's happened, and it's so obviously going to work anyway. Like, what's the point? I mean, at least say what you will about the likes of Jake Lucky, who I've name dropped several times in this episode. I don't even know if he calls himself a journalist. I
believe he claims he isn't one for the last few years.
Yeah,
he claims he just posts stuff on the internet or something, whatever that means. I don't know.
Which is kind of like that Alex Jones thing of being like, I'm going to set up a news desk with a window up here of what story I'm talking about and shuffle papers. But whatever you do, don't call me a journalist. I'm not. I'm just sharing information, right? It's like, but I'm going to use semiology to make you imbue me with credibility in your brain. But yeah, it's like, say what you will about Jake Lucky, at least he's turning it to his advantage. I mean, like, what are we doing? It's just fucking.
I'll tell you one thing: no one ever gives Jake Lucky one piece of credit, even though you might say something stupid, which I know what the follow-up will be. Of like, well, anyone could just hit a tweet. No, but you wouldn't though. That's the thing. I'll give Jake Lucky. He actually presses send tweet every day. Like, I think his work is trash. He has no editorial standards. He doesn't even know what the principles and ethics of journalism are. And he apparently doesn't consider himself a journalist, while essentially, by every other, as Richard says, way of presenting yourself, you're clearly actually playing on the idea you are a journalist and a credible figure who knows what you're talking about. But I tell you what, that's actually an underrated detail. There's also a lot of people in the industry, by the way, who might make all these different arguments. They don't fucking do any work. There's another thing. It's an industry of slackers. Like, I've always said this. Here's the reason why I have done 10 times more content than people who are my peers sometimes. Because I always said they're people who wanted to play video games and then, as a laugh on the side, get paid to write the odd piece of content. I do the content and maybe on the side I'll fit in some video games. You know what I mean? Like, who has fucking time to play video games? Bro, there's people who've submitted like 4 things in a month, but they've just got the Elden Ring DLC going on. What are you talking about, mate? I'm like 5 years behind on some films I want to see. Like, are you here to do the work or not? Like, that's another thing, by the way, of why I hate those editors that took all that money from those VC companies, because my content has essentially been like free talent scouting of the next like commentators, journalists, everyone that I can find who's good, who hasn't been given a platform. I always bring them onto my stuff and do that. And some of them go on to much bigger. I always just think, why am I doing that? Like, that's your job, the editor. You should be the one reading all the like semi-pro stuff, and you should find Stuccio on a forum somewhere. You should see that Hawker does videos that already could be on like ESLCS channel as like fucking breakdown of a team roster. Why they can't see that? I mean, that's why I actually agree with Richard. The first place I would blame is who hires the editors, which is why when it's the old examples like ESPN, I can tell you, unfortunately, that's a boomer from sports who only knows the traditional print media world. So when he sees the editor who goes, well, I interned here and then I worked at a newspaper there, that's the guy. He's not going to hire Richard, because the joke is he would look at, this is actually for real what someone might have said 10 years ago. They would look at Richard's incredible esports CV and they'd go, there's a gap on your CV of this entire period where you're doing this thing called esports. Like, why didn't you have any real journalism jobs? And then he would never get the job. They would never hire him. Therefore, he could never use his eye to hire a Jacob Wolf before there was someone, or a Josh. He'd never be able to do that in this world. So I feel like the bottleneck still is like the people who get hired by the company at the beginning. That's the end of the episode. Peace. See you next week.
No, plenty more to talk about. I mean, I do think like we should transition into some of the modern platforms and what's going on as well, because we haven't even touched the fact that the Google SEO stuff has like crushed a bunch of websites. I do think, you know, the discussion around Dr. Disrespect and what happened there, because, you know, what's interesting about that is not a bunch of the former esports journalists are all involved in this scandal too, especially with Slasher, right? Who doesn't do, I mean, his job these days is like tweeting vague and often incorrect things about actual esports, and then, you know, people trying to shoehorn into the streamer drama industry and basically turn into, you know, TMZ for
the media
gamers.
tour. That was his job. I thought Slasher was on a media tour.
Oh, that's right.
I mean, the joke is Jake Lucky used to be Slasher Light, and now Slasher is Diet Jake Lucky. Zero with added extra fucking chemicals, you know. Like.
But before we do that, we do have one more sponsor today, guys, on the Four Horsemen, and that is Factor, who can deliver fresh meals, never frozen, to your house that are ready in 2 minutes. So we've got lots of options. Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, Keto, whatever you want for your diet. They have 35 different meals every week, 60 add-ons, including protein shakes and other snacks that you can get from them. It's all delivered in a box that is cooled. It's refrigerated, and then it has ice packs in it to keep everything nice and fresh. So go ahead. Factor's great. I really enjoyed it in my time in the States in May. Saved me a lot of time and helped me eat healthier as well, instead of eating out quite so much if you don't have a lot of time. So Factor is wonderful. Head over to factormeals.com/horsemen50. That is, again, horsemen plural, and use code horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code horsemen50 at factormeals.com/horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. So thank you very much to Factor for continuing to support and sponsor this show. As we've said many times, best way to support us is to support our sponsors. So if you've been thinking about trying Factor, saving yourself some money, take it to work with you. If you work from home, saves you some time during the day as well. If you're busy, pop it in for 2 minutes at dinner. So there you go, guys. Thank you to Factor. Let us talk about the recent developments within esports journalism, because we've heard reports that, sites like Deserto that were doing a lot of esports and other entertainment journalism have suddenly had their metrics completely crash because Google itself changed the search engine optimization, or SEO. So we've seen a lot of sites falling, their kind of, viewership on articles falling by 50% or more, really out of the blue. So it feels like the rules have just kind of changed, because what a lot of the journalism sites that end up doing, guys, was trying to write articles that would be answers to questions that people would type into Google. And that became the major source of their hits and their revenue, because as we know, social media is actually useless for driving people to content. People look at the tweet or whatever, and then they don't click on the content. So you need other ways to do that, and that was through Google. And that has created like a new panic, because the business model that was actually working is now no longer working. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look. The business model in esports journalism, as we've alluded to, has been busted for a long, long time. And it's sort of like a microcosm of the industry itself. It's like the only way it can work is to be underwritten by a sugar daddy. And so, now the sugar daddy is Saudi Arabia. 10 years ago, the sugar daddy was investment money. And look, the media has an issue in general, right? Like, it's not a unique esports problem. It just so happens to be that esports itself is a failing product, and anything that comes into contact with it will also fail. That is life. That is, esports. It could have worked, but instead we've chosen this for some reason where it objectively doesn't. But there is a business model that works, and we know, because not every publication in the world is a failure. Not every publication doesn't make money. I mean, sure, we've come through kind of a winter in media as well, where there's been lots of layoffs at publications, lots of journalists have been laid off. I would argue, again, in a lot of those cases, those journalists didn't offer anything of value anyway. It's very hard to cry for Kotaku journalists having to go to the job center. Like, what did you actually do? Like, rage bait can only carry you so far as a business model. But ultimately, there's a model that works. We've never chosen to adopt it. We were way too slow on things that were obviously working in media, podcasts being the most obvious, glaring example. Like, how many media outlets had podcasts at the same time they were publishing esports news? They always none. None. Everyone came late to that party. So, which, by the way, if you had a definitive one, let's say, for example, like when we were doing By the Numbers, or Summoning Insight, which, as you said, it was on Gamers for a while, but if we'd have had that wrapped up and in something like an ESPN, that would have been massive. It would have been massive for them, would have been massive for us, would have done really well. But no, they only, people only conceptualize what the new media landscape is pretty much just through the lens of, people are going to click on this website for news, so let's make sure there is news for them to click on. And it's just got to be so much more than that. And people, unfortunately, they don't have the creativity, they don't have the ideas, they don't have the experience, they don't have the vision, they don't have the drive. And again, I just come back to the editors. They all suck. Esports editors are trash. They run publications into the ground with terrible ideas while taking six-figure salaries.
Let me give you some thoughts that I've had on media in the last couple of weeks here. One is, we used to have traditional media where it's all old folks that sort of had access to PCs back in the day, because we were the ones that had money. We can get it online. We would check traditional news sources, the New York Times, LA Times, CNN, things like that. Today is a different day. It's more of an a la carte news selection, where these, all the mobile phones from all the kids, where they're getting their news from? TikTokers, Instagram. Yeah. So they're a la carting their news, because they're literally saying, I'm interested in these people, and this is where I'm going to get my news from. It's going to be directly from the source. That's why Zendaya quit X. She's only on Instagram now. And so a lot of I've heard from some people in professional sports where, they want to do interviews and they want to put it on their team site. And they're like, bro, I have 3 times more followers than our team site. Let's just put it on mine because that's where the views are going to come from, right? So, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention PvP Live, I thought was doing it right, but they were too soon. The video hits. If you guys remember, they would take to video and they would do some video. I think that was Rondez Green, even a couple of others. And it just became too expensive. And that was when not a whole lot of kids had cell phones, right? I think if PvP Live, that model came back today, I think that could work pretty well. But again, and then lastly, I've been hearing rumors that Google doesn't want to facilitate your news search. It wants to be your news. It wants you to only go to Google to get the news, and it's gonna list it and write it for you.
Well, that's why in Google you have the AI results now, Kevin, that summarize what you're searching for at the top, so you don't even have to click onto those sites. It's just scraping them.
Yep. No, that's basically my thoughts. It's a new generation of news consumers, and it's more of an a la carte type thing, and people would rather go to TikTok, Instagram, and follow the people they actually want to hear from. Much like your subs. Much like your subs.
This is the other aspect of it. I mean, obviously, that's fine, but unfortunately, just by the nature of how you present things these days, if you want to be popular, it's like, I don't know, the type of stories I'm writing about, like, let's say, for instance, like a convoluted match fixing story or something like that. How am I summarizing that in a 60-second TikTok? Even if I would put my shit on TikTok to begin with, which of course I won't because it's Chinese spyware. Yeah. So, one of the problems we've got, I mean, just in general, is informational diet. And there's a huge deficit of good news people out there. I think in general, YouTube started the trend. I've always been a big advocate for just in general, if you want to present information to the general public, you do it, and you do it in any way you see fit. I was a dissenting voice when everyone was attacking Keemstar and trying to get him banned from the internet, saying Drama Alert was encouraging negativity. Who gives a fuck? I mean, world's a negative place. Real life encourages negativity, and there's a place for I think TMZ's garbage. I'd be ashamed if I ever worked for TMZ or trafficked in their dark arts to get stories. For example, Kobe Bryant's family finding out Kobe Bryant was dead from TMZ and not from first responders or anything like that because they had a connection at the police. Things like that are grotesque. They're an affront to good journalism. Do I think TMZ should be censored and forced to not do those things? No, I don't like that. I wouldn't want anyone sticking their fingers in the gumbo there. And so with YouTube, you have that similar problem. It's like people were saying to me, say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I get my news digest from Philip DeFranco. And you go, yikes, I don't know about that, but okay, it's not that bad. Well, now fucking Philip DeFranco looks like fucking, Woodward and fucking Bernstein compared to the shit you get on fucking TikTok these days, where it's just literally and by the way, even on Twitch, top political fucking commentators sit there reading fucking Twitter all day, just in real time. They haven't even disseminated the information they're reading. I mean, obviously, one example is Hassan. He's the most popular political streamer on the platform. He considers himself to be a journalist. He's used that term. He said that he's doing news coverage on his site. Just the other day, he did a story that was essentially an anti-Semitic trope. Saying that the Jewish government knew about October 7th before it happened. And he just put that, it's just out there. It's up on YouTube as well. No one's going to censor that or take that away. It's complete nonsense. It's predicated on the fact that there was an intelligence document 2 years ago saying maybe Hamas might paraglide over the border and kill a bunch of people. Not quite the same thing,
Right.
but whatever. So this is the type of thing you're up against, and unfortunately, esports is downstream of culture. Culture's got a problem. The way we do news is out. The journalistic credibility crisis is there
That's
for
crazy.
everybody to see. It doesn't mean anything anymore to be a journalist. No one wants to be the arbiter of truth or any of that stuff, or be the fourth estate that Kevin was talking about. Nobody wants to do that anymore. They just want to get paid and be in the cool kids club and have cocktails in New York, in Manhattan, with their fellow colleagues talking about, those Rust Belt states or whatever. They don't really give a fuck about any of the bigger stuff. And so does that feed into esports? Yeah. I mean, the reality is, honestly, for all, like, Jake, look, he's just shit. Like, he's mostly benign.
Well, he's not a Bond villain, of course not. No, of course not.
He's ill-equipped to deal with stories that require any sensitivity whatsoever. Like, I've called him out in the past. He's like, and he fucked up doing the same mistake again, which shows he doesn't listen to real journalists. But when you're covering something as potentially destructive as revenge porn, don't make it salacious and don't treat it frivolously. You don't have to necessarily be a mouthpiece for everything you hear. There is a harm mitigation concern, and obviously it happened recently with the streamer, and that streamer goes live and says, I'm ashamed of what I did, and I was thinking about when it came out, I literally had to be talked down from killing myself because these journalists put it out everywhere. And I think to myself, at what point are the clicks worth it? Like, at what point do you go, that's good? This has happened a number of times. I think about what happened with Etika, which I wrote about extensively. Ultimately, there's a lot of people that they want all of the credibility of being a journalist, but none of the responsibility of being a journalist. They don't produce good work anyway, but unfortunately, they are inexplicably popular just because of how they package things. And that's a real problem. We've got and esports is full of it now. It is the norm, not the exception.
No, I mean, I would agree. Like, one of the problems you also have is even some of the people who are big names and or successful, they either didn't know what professional journalistic ethics are in the first place, or they've almost intentionally, in a Faustian bargain, given them up to get the first story, the more salacious story, the angle on the story they couldn't get if they had to follow the rules of how many sources and do you actually have it all squared away, etc. Like, I could run down every big name you want on the list. They'd all have a thing that they've done. Like, the obvious examples are people like Jake Lucky, but again, they shouldn't even be the big bad of this. Like, there's people who intentionally know what they're doing. Jake Lucky doesn't even know what the ethics of journalism are. That's the stupidest part about it. That's why, if anything, if he actually claims he's not a journalist, that's probably one of the smarter things he's said. Like, that's better than if he claimed he was a journalist, but he just didn't know what a journalist is or does. Like, I can at least somewhat, I can't say respect it, but it makes me dislike it less. The idea that at least he's not hiding behind the idea he is one, and a journalist just anyone reports anything. Because, by the way, at any point, Monty, if you want to lead into the Dr. Disrespect thing, I'll even say, holy fuck, there's two parts to that have actually made me think, just fucking, I mean, the Saudis are right, just shut it down. We don't need esports journalism. It's nonsense. What we have now is it's like the bad player union in CS. It's a fake esports journalism that gets in the way of real esports journalism, and even worse, implies there is esports journalism when there isn't. Because if you think about that story, there was two angles people took, right? One, an actual fucking esports award winner, Jacob Wolf, said this himself. There's one angle which was, well, if you all knew, why didn't you all just publish what you knew? Which is like, holy fuck, do you not know even the most basic legal evidentiary standards someone would need to run stories like that, you idiots? Like, that's a real story, by the way, that can get like all your fucking career ended, all your shit taken. If you work for a website, by the way, the whole fucking site Gorecast could just go down. That could just be the end of everyone's job. Like, the idea, because what they acted, right, this is what's crazy. The reason why that example is mental is because they genuinely were giving the implication, in my opinion, that the actual journalists like Slasher or Jacob himself, if he'd had the story, could have just done what Cody did. Whereas, like, bro, there's a reason even Cody tried to walk that back, because that would be mental to do a tweet like that. That would be absolutely absurd. Especially because, remember, the craziest part about the evidentiary standard is none of you have any evidence. It's all like hearsay, but it's legit people you've heard it from. Like, that's the maddest part about this. It's only actually funnily enough, the reaction to that's allowed something of a story to be crafted, and some things have come out behind the scenes. Like, there was never any way anyone could have published in all those years. As far as I'm aware, not a single person ever actually like covered that story up like they're implying, or like hid it because they were scared. There wasn't a story to publish. It was just rumor.
So I think this is important to talk about because, like, first off, I want to differentiate between what happened with Dr. Disrespect and esports journalism, because it really tilts me in general when people conflate. Because, like, the plebs are always like, I love esports, ninjas stream. I'm like, no, that's just competitive gaming. Like, esports is the professional play of video games. And Ninja used to be a pro player, used to be a professional Halo player. This is true. But what he's doing on Fortnite has nothing to do with esports. This is a different kind of entertainment content. Dr. Disrespect never had anything to do with esports. Was he at the Esports Award winning streamer of the year? Yes. Do I disagree with the Esports Awards, including streamers within that wheelhouse? Absolutely, because it's not fucking esports. They did it because they wanted to get better viewership. And basically what happened is esports and personalities and streamers used to be the same thing. You guys, some of you may remember, in the early days of League of Legends, all the most popular streamers were the players in the LCS, right? In League of Legends. It used to be the same thing. But that changed because the demands of being a professional gamer, as the scene professionalized, meant that they couldn't be the same level of, 50-hour-a-week streamers and be on the pro teams at the same time. So what it ended up emerging was a class of entertainer streamers who are not esports people, including Dr. Disrespect and his personality. So what happened with Dr. Disrespect, if you have been living under a rock, obviously he was a huge personality. He got banned from Twitch years ago. Like, what, 4 years ago? And it was never said publicly why this happened. There was a lot of speculation. Slasher, who used to be an esports journalist, who has now retooled himself, like so many others, into gaming drama streamer journalist.
He's still an esports journalist. He still reports on esports. You can't mischaracterize him like that. Come on, that's
does he do it accurately, Richard?
I mean, yeah. Listen, you can pick a lot of faults with Rod for sure, but saying he's like only doing drama and stuff now is not accurate. The bulk of his tweets since he got back active on Twitter have actually been around the Esports World Cup stuff. So he's very much in alignment with us on that particular issue.
There you go. So anyway, this stemmed from a tweet years ago when this happened, where he said, very famously, Dr. Disrespect is done, and not just on Twitch. Now, nobody really knew this. And to Thorin's point, you can't just, even if you publish factually accurate things, what happened with the Hulk Hogan case on Gawker made a bunch of media companies very afraid to publish even the truth, because the consequence of them being sued is the entire site, like, basically getting bankrupted by legal fees and, run into the ground and everybody losing their jobs. So as these guys, I am not a journalist, but as these guys will all tell you, sometimes when you have a particularly hot story, everyone will refuse to publish it, even if it's true. And that has actually stopped a lot of good journalism being done in games, because people are afraid of the ramifications of going up against these giant companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, with things that are true, but the threat of the lawsuits, even if you are right, even if you can factually prove that you are right, could still mean the death of the media publication.
A couple things that I wanted just to add,
Sure.
just on its very basic level, so people understand. If I make an accusation against somebody, and they sue me, I don't get to go looking through their stuff. I have to prove that I knew that from my stuff. And I don't think people understand that sometimes, basic discovery law, which is, if I said something about Dr. Disrespect and we go to court, I don't get to subpoena his shit, because that's not what I base my statements on. You see what I'm saying? So people don't understand that.
There's no discovery process. You have to prove that. Yeah,
exactly. Some people don't understand that. They're like, oh, well, now I can get access to. No, you can't. It's got to be all from what you have. And then if they want to add that as defense, yes.
And it certainly goes the other way in a defamation lawsuit.
Certainly.
The first thing, I know a little bit about this. The first thing that happens is you are instructed to preserve all your records and all electronic records that pertain even vaguely to the matter. And if you get caught deleting anything, I mean, obviously it can be, contempt or whatever the fuck. So yeah, it does. A lot of people always say like, yeah, let's do discovery. Generally, what kind of intimidates people into suing you for a defamation suit is they're worried. They know they did it. They know you're right, and they're worried about what you have. Because if I go, okay, well, look, there it is, and it's a fucking kill shot. You submitted that into the record, like yeah. I mean that's generally why there's a fear. But if people believe you've got nothing and you're trafficking in like rumor or whatever, yeah, obviously they're gonna go for it. I mean, sometimes people do, almost like exploratory fucking lawsuits. Because if you don't have a retraction, they're pretty confident they can find out who leaked the information on the basis of what's going to come out in the subsequent lawsuit. So, yeah, I mean, but back to Christopher's point, which is these powerful entities that come into the space and essentially get to dominate news flow. Well, again, we're now going beyond Twitch. And we're now doing governments that can, actually, it's not just you might get sued, it's that you could get, I don't know, fucking, who knows? Assassinated
people.
Assassinated in a Turkish consulate.
Agented.
Yeah. So, the stakes are a little bit higher, guys.
So this is all to say that, like, when you think about the Dr. Disrespect issue, you have to remember that even if somebody did have the smoking gun, nobody might be willing to publish it, basically. And this has been something that's been happening time and time again I know in the video game space, I would assume in every space. But in any case, so this just dies for 4 years. And then all of a sudden, so Cody Connors, a former Twitch employee who, Thorin, you mentioned was also an employee at OnGamer. So he also comes from the esports scene. Basically,
he's known Slash for a long, long time. So he's also someone he knows. Yeah.
So he made a tweet. He no longer works at Twitch. He made a tweet, basically not even naming Dr. Disrespect, but implying that everybody could read between the lines that it was Dr. Disrespect. That effectively what had happened is that Twitch had implemented a private messaging system called Twitch Whispers, which apparently Twitch employees had access to, which is also possibly a crime in Europe, by the way. I mean, it possibly is illegal in Europe in terms of confidentiality laws for them to just like look into your DMs whenever they fucking feel like it. And so what happened was he revealed that the allegations are that Dr. Disrespect had been knowingly messaging a minor about a meetup at TwitchCon, presumably for some sort of sexual purpose. But there's never been any evidence that has actually come out about this. I will say there was
it's
a lot of.
There never will be, by the way. Whoever has the evidence is at this point just not giving it up, right? Seems like
It's a sealed document in a court case. It's not in any public entity. It's literally sitting in the file offices of Guy Beam's lawyer and Amazon's lawyer. Those are the only two people that have it.
So basically, like, to this day, it's very unclear what actually went down. And, there's a lot of conversations about, what did this mean? But I think what's more interesting is like the state of journalism around this, because it was not great, to say the least. And so I'd like to hear you guys' take on kind of how this unfolded, because it was very bizarre. And because there's still
I want to ask people, I want to get people's take on this. Here's one reason why I'm actually quite different from Richard on this one. From watching Richard's video about this topic, it seems like his take is most people knew the gist of what happened. They just, again, it was just hearsay. They didn't have anything they could go on. They could never track someone down. No one would go on the record, even anonymous. You just couldn't get any of the information. And especially, like we're saying, this isn't just like a players moving on another team. You need a very strong evidentiary standard if you're going to publish a story like this. But the problem I have is this. What makes me think people had only distantly heard of this, or they'd heard something like, oh, he did something like naughty and he's never coming back, like Slash's tweet very vaguely implies is. I'm just going to throw this out there. To me, it's such a serious thing you're implying he did and alleging. Like, everyone's tone was incredibly irreverent for the last 4 years. They were making it almost like a laughable, and everyone knows why. It's like, would that really be the tone you'd take if, by your logic, someone was grooming someone for like a potentially like illegal sexual encounter? Like, that's to me, that's just such a weird tone to take. Like, there's certain topics I'll joke about, but like, for example, I wouldn't make a joke about like Etika committing suicide. What's funny about that? Like, even if you could make a dark joke, it's just, as a journalist, that just seems a bit off your tone on it, you know? So I would just say that. I wonder what you think of that, Richard. What do you think? Because to me, it's like they are trying to have their cake and eat it. They've made it seem like it's just some not that big thing or frivolous or something. But then now they're saying, but I knew the whole time it was this really serious thing. It's like, why did you treat it that way then? What? Especially if you thought it was going to drop at any moment, you know.
It was weird tonally. I mean, I think ultimately there's like, you know, it's kind of instructive as to how serious people really thought it was, and ultimately because it fell by the wayside and existed only in the shadowy world of innuendo, I think people got real comfortable kind of like making allusions and jokes about it to the point where they weren't really thinking about the wider implications. Like, for me, you know, one of the reasons why I never tweeted about it or talked about it,
I was never going to tweet ever.
Yeah, I was on that story. I failed to get it over the line as well. And I explicitly explained why in my video, which was, you know, anyone who was on that story, I'm sure Kevin was on it as well. Anyone who was on that story, a weird thing happened like 2 days approximately into it. And that was that the zone just got flooded with all sorts of shit, weird details. For me, I had a source suddenly change the key elements of the story.
Did you think this was bait? Like they're trying to trick you into saying the wrong thing or something, like Flack essentially getting released?
Another source that explicitly had knowledge of what had happened, they said, be super careful with everything right now because there's like the zone is getting flooded with shit. There's like people are starting to lie about it because everyone's trying to find out where the leaks are coming from because this is so big. Now, I don't know who was putting out the disinformation. I can only speculate. Could have been Twitch, could have been the Doc, could have been the Doc's talent agency, could just be like any big story. Everybody wants to be in the know, but nobody really knows. So everyone starts talking, and suddenly a story that's this becomes that, but more people are saying that. So do you go with that when you kind of know it's this? The better source says it's that, but more people say it's this. So what do you do? So in the end, it was a confusing muddle of you know, information that couldn't be untangled in anything I would consider coherent. And ultimately, I planted my standard and said, guys, like, listen, I trust you. You've been excellent sources in the past, but I need to see something. It cannot. This is too big because if this is wrong, I'm ruining someone's reputation. I'm ruining their life. You know, this is a guy with kids and a wife. If this is wrong, fuck being sued and being a industry pariah. Yeah. You destroy someone on top of
tomorrow.
that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I said I need to see something. You know, there has to be an email chain somewhere of someone making the decision and explicitly explaining that decision. I need to see something like that. Without any documentation, without anything I consider a smoking gun, I am not covering this story. But then after making that decision, a lot of journalists were similarly hindered like me, but they wanted to be for me, it was just another weekday. Like, I'll just go write about someone else. It's like there's a million scandals, a million stories. I mean, I don't even do streaming drama. There's much more important things happening than, you know, trying to get into why X streamer was banned. You know, as it happened, it wasn't drama. It was something, you know, serious. But at the time, they said there was all this conflicting information as to what it would be. And there's one version of the story where age isn't an element of the story. This is another reason why it was super confusing. So anyway, but a lot of journalists wanted to have their cake and eat it and basically wanted to appear in the know. And so they were tweeting things like, oh, well, wait till you hear why Doc got banned. Well, okay, are you going to tell me? And I don't want to call it malpractice. That's way too strong a word. But I think that when you allude to the fact you know something, but you aren't willing to commit to it publicly, I think it's right that hurts your credibility as a journalist. Because you will know if I know something, because I will say it and I will put my name on it. I will George Foreman grill that motherfucker. Richard Lewis says this. Take it to the bank. I got a 100% record. Never a retraction. Never had to issue an apology. Occasionally, like because I'll be honest, there's been a couple of details that might be slightly off, but ultimately I'm still in the ballpark, and the broad strokes are 100% accurate. That accuracy is essentially like, I consider it to be my brand, and I'm not going to throw it away for Twitter engagement. If even if I'm 95% certain, the difference between 95 and 100, when you are dealing with a story of that magnitude, the gulf is immense, and nobody should be out there kind of going like, I kind of know about it, but do I? Who get in my DMs? It's like, what are you? Are you a fucking journalist or what? Like, what are we doing here? So yeah, I agree. I thought tonally the approach to the coverage was off, and then obviously now everybody wants it to be a super serious story again, and going, oh, well, of course we had to think about the child protective element. Well, you weren't thinking about that when you kept the fucking story in the public eye.
If you knew that 4
years
ago, he could have perpetuated this behavior. So you clearly were not super concerned about that.
Well, I mean, listen, now I won't put that evil on people, because I think
publish the story, though, Monty.
if you can't publish the story, like, I don't think people stopped covering it.
No, exactly. I don't think it was the cover-up at all. I think that whole angle that it was a conspiracy doesn't make any sense to me. It actually is the opposite. It was 1 million people who, by the way, some of them not even as strict as Richard, and even on their shitty evidentiary standard, they still couldn't get the story out. 1 million people wanted it out. I know certain people who might have commented on this story who used one fucking source, and they couldn't publish it. That means you couldn't even get one source, bro. You couldn't even get one. I even think, by the way, here's what my entire field fucked up here. I care a lot about how things are phrased. None of you knew what happened with Dr. Disrespect. You knew what someone told you happened with Dr. If you'd have phrased it that way, we're all clear. But you had to say you knew. Saying you knew, like Richard says, implies you have seen evidence. You know this as a fact. You're just, for them, this is why then Jacob Wolf is totally wide open to say, why don't you publish it then if you knew it? If you'd have just said, I know what people are saying in the industry, and look, they're credible people, but they won't go on then that's a very, you notice how that one layer, the problem is, that one layer of abstraction, not a sexier story anymore, is it? All of a sudden it's not as salacious, like, well, but what really, again, that's not really as cool, whereas you want to make it seem like you did know what happened. Because even the way Slasher's tweet phrased it, I always thought was so telling. He didn't just say, Dr. Disrespect is done, and, there's a good reason. He put an everywhere, but then he wasn't done everywhere. There's another question for you journalists of the industry. You people, you know what journalists are like when they have a secret they think they know, Monty? They can't shut the fuck up hinting about it like Slasher. So you're going to tell me for 4 years since then, Dr. Disrespect went over to YouTube and was still a massive figure in the scene. By the way, gaining endorsements, sponsorships. He's in fucking
Billions
NBA 2K, for God's sake. He's in a fucking basketball game. It's not even related to basketball, for fuck's sake. You're telling me all these giant windfalls happen to Dr. Disrespect, but all these people who knew what happened never even did a snide tweet like, I can't believe he's getting this deal from YouTube when we all know what he did. I can't believe he's in NBA 2K, a children's video. I wouldn't say that word, but you know what these cunts are. So they didn't even do those tweets. So I'm sorry. Conspicuous, guys, is your lack of smug, shit-eating grins, as you tell us a million other times for 4 years. You knew what happened. That implies to me, you knew that first rumor that Richard heard all the way back then. No one could get it any further. And really, that story absolutely has been on ice for 4 years. It's just been on ice like that, just like in this tiny dormant life state, but not in any way growing or changing as a story. And it's only this Cody Connors tweet that's now actually reignited it. Otherwise, it's implied, by the way, this would never have come out. It would have stayed like that forever, or it'd be like some Kennedy, redacted files. Like maybe we'll find out in 30 years when it doesn't matter and there's all black squares over all the names. And it's like, who even kids a fuck at that point? It's actually implied to me would never have found the story out.
I mean, as I said, it's not the Dr. Disrespect angle isn't even the bigger part of it. Like, this is what really annoys me, because this is how you know the people that made the tweets about the doc after the fact, they were doing it for clout and engagement, because the story is, why did Twitch agree to arbitration?
Yes.
If they knew that this
the
was the type
question.
of behavior that had been
Yes.
engaged in, right?
Yep.
And I'll tell you, I'll tell you my speculation on it, because in 2019 or it might have been 2018, I think 2019, I wrote a story after being approached by a source that showed how like predators were using Twitch to gain easy, unchecked access to children by using a curious mechanism in the algorithm when you search for streams, and they were able to find like kids as young as 8 who were turning on their phone and going live on a Twitch account, and then just having unchecked access to them. And Twitch never gave me any comment about that. They as far as I'm aware, they took some internal action, but they never made a public post to say we were aware of this story and we dealt with it this way. Cecilia D'Anastasia picked it up and covered it again a year later, whichever publication she was at, Forbes or Bloomberg. I don't quite remember off the top of my head. And I just think ultimately Twitch were like, being adjacent to that kind of headline, not great for us right now. And so ultimately, if Doc did get paid, as he claims, which by the way, he's always alluded to the fact he got the rest of his contract. I'd be surprised if that's true. Generally, when you go to arbitration, you don't get that. Exactly. You meet in the middle. But the fact is, ultimately, Twitch paid him to go away. And then
which
now
is very
have it
believable, by the way, which is very
story.
believable.
That's the weirdest part. The most obvious reason why Twitch wouldn't want this to come out is because he was their fucking superstar. Why would they want their superstar to be embroiled in that behavior, even if they're firing him and getting rid of him? Like, that's a terrible look for Twitch. In fact, I'd even say this right now. If you think about the way politically people frame the whole TikTok ban and like they're influencing children and all this, and the way people typically take that angle, like leave the kids alone. Like, well, this would play right into that wheelhouse politically. Like, Twitch should be up in so much trouble, which, by the way, is Amazon essentially.
Yeah, and so ultimately, like that to me, you're paying him to go away, but then we've now got it on record that YouTube had heard the same rumors everyone had heard behind the scenes, and they didn't offer him a contract on that basis, but they still allowed him on the platform. So, like, this is interesting.
That would have been a bigger lawsuit. That would have been, and that's how you know that YouTube didn't know, because they because if they would have said, "Oh no, sorry." Twitch, Amazon's getting sued for 3 times 10 million or however much he got, right? And the other thing is, it leads some credence to what Monty was saying with the Twitch stuff is, did someone really report it to Twitch, or did Twitch find out nefariously on their own? And that's why nobody knows. That's why I think that's the bigger story, is the Twitch portion of it. Why they paid the doc out? How did they find out? That's what I want to know.
By the way, I also think the craziest thing to me is, I still think the biggest part of that story, if as it is presented is true, is that Twitch was reading the DMs of a fucking private messenger. Like, am I the only one who doesn't see how insane that is? Like, essentially, that would be like saying, I've caught this guy who's done something dodgy. How did you catch him? Because we're going to need to go to court. I just hacked his WhatsApp. I've been reading everything. He's been right. But yeah, good luck taking that. By the way, you're going to prison if that comes out. What are you talking about? Like, that's the craziest part to me, is like, I mean, look, I know they shut it down now, but like, that's because here's the other part people don't think about. If they were reading his Twitch whispers, who else were they reading? Were they reading Pokemans and everyone else out there who's famous? By the way, that might be insane, some of the shit they might have actually uncovered and read there. I actually imagine that could have been the end of Twitch if that went the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, there are like all these data protection issues, but I mean, hopefully everybody does understand that. Like we talked about with the Vanguard episode. I mean, obviously these platforms, they're reading your DMs, guys. I mean, like,
you have to assume that at this point automatically, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's even in legal documentation that Facebook was, for example, Facebook and Meta and Insta and all that, they were using DMs to do targeted ads, and then, by the way, they sold that data, including the data they gleaned from private messages, to Netflix. Okay. Right, this is a matter of legal record, So I mean, these platforms are reading your DMs. It's why Elon Musk might be fucking mental, but at least he is saying he wants Twitter to have encrypted DMs. I don't know if he's ever implemented that. Obviously, I use it for my journalism. I have a kind of method where I delete everything, even because if a Twitch employee reads it, it probably doesn't mean anything to them. But obviously, if it got hacked or whatever, they'd still be there. So I mean, that's. Goes without saying.
I mean, there's tons of potential issues if Twitch could read this. Like, not only European privacy laws, but like I'm just gonna be straight up. I don't know legally what happens if they are reading the messages of minors? Because if there's a
texting,
minor
etc. Yeah, what about them?
involved
Yeah,
in this, like, you know,
course.
you have no idea what is happening, like, on these Twitch whispers, and I don't know what the legal ramifications
Monty,
of.
you know those stories that people have heard of because they're real, where there's certain laws. It was actually often in America where you'd have a law against like sexting, but it would be under like a child porn rule, and it would mean that actually, if like an 8-year-old girl took a picture of herself and sent it to an 8-year-old boy, she was guilty of actually having essentially child porn under the law. So no, I agree, Monty. People don't realize to even just be viewing that information might have massive legal consequences. Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Oh, Duncan, you're absolutely right. That's a very good example of, and it happens more than you think in high schools across the country. I'm a high school coach, and there are pictures that are floating around in all these kids' phones that are actually felonies all over the country. So that is not that far off.
So anyway, those are some of the issues with the Dr. Disrespect. You guys have you guys want to put a pin on this in terms of the criticism of journalism? Because I mean, this has just been a shit show, basically. Like, I feel like we've reached the end of this news cycle, and I still don't have any fucking idea what actually happened in this case.
I mean, look, with the Dr. Disrespect stuff, again, it's kind of like the bigger problem is like, so because you can't work as a journalist per se anymore. Like, you know, if you work at a publication, like, I mean, what are you even doing to earn your money? So a lot of people go independent because they can do better with that. But then when you go independent, there's this weird line that you walk, which is you yourself have to have some sizzle on the steak. And what I see happening now with too many journalists is they behave like they're influencers. They behave like they're the influencer, and unfortunately, even with people that I have like a nominal amount of respect for, just on the basis of the work they've done in the past, they kind of can't help themselves. And maybe you have to do that these days. You know, I talked about it in the article I published the other day on my Substack, like. Back when I was writing in the right-wing chudosphere, the one thing they would tell you at like publications like Breitbart and all of that stuff was every time you get a story right, make sure you fucking spike the football. Make sure your next story is about how fucking right you were and everyone else was wrong and you're the best and everyone should listen to you. If they want to get the straight dope, they have to come to you. And that was something you had to do that every single time. That was like their rule. And it's like, it is probably a good lesson to learn if you want to be famous and you want to have lots of attention and you want your articles to do good numbers. But unfortunately, wrapped up in the mechanics is a grift. It's a hustle. And so when you start adopting that as a means to publish your work, invariably, you are going to let yourself down on what it's meant to be, and I know people have forgotten this, a very noble and somber, just the facts, ma'am, profession. That's what we're meant to be doing. We're meant to be disseminating information for the general public, information that's in the public knowledge, information that enhances the lives of the public because they can make informed decisions, or they are protected by things that would otherwise harm them, or powerful people that would otherwise exploit them. That's what you're meant to be doing as a journalist. There's all this crap out there, but if you read this, you will know what's going on, and then you can take that information and do with it what you will. We don't really do that anymore. And it's a broader problem. If you are a name, if your byline is recognizable, I think you almost have to engage in these trappings of showmanship. You know, I do it. I guess the difference is, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I think I don't stray over the line into behaving like an influencer, but maybe I do. You know, I mean, I'm going to be working events again this year. Should I be doing that if I want to be considered a serious journalist? Well, I kind of got to, because I've got bills to pay, and as well as the Substack is doing, annualized, got to make more. Got to make hay while the sun shines, be retired one day. So I feel the pain. I think a lot of journalists that are independent to make money, well, you're only going to make money if you get attention and subscriptions. And to do that, you have to make people aware of your work. And to do that, you have to put things out there that are going to maybe go viral. And if you're talking about going viral as a journalist, We're on that threshold, aren't we? So it's a very complicated and nuanced issue for sure.
I want to get Kevin's thoughts, because obviously you've come like into the industry later than some of us, and you've seen like the beginning of some of this stuff. You've seen how it's morphed. What do you think? What is your sense of what went wrong? What do you think went wrong?
I think that much like the esports industry as a whole, I think a bunch of folks that were ill-equipped, not educated, or born in the fires of it in the beginning, took over the space in a way. A lot of people that owned quote unquote esports organizations that are CEOs were just good video game players with no business acumen. And I felt like there was a time in journalism since I got here that exact same thing has happened. And it's just a lot of people that played video games said, "Oh, I can write about this, so I'm going to be a journalist now." And they're finding they're no longer working in journalism because they couldn't put in the work or abide by the journalistic standards and ethic it takes to do this job. And again, you guys know, I've talked to you frequently. I have a law enforcement background. I went into law enforcement, and if you don't do everything by the book, you're not going to be in that industry long either. And in fact, it can get you in a lot of trouble. Right. So I think the industry is starting to see those people that couldn't get it done because it's harder than they thought have left. I think people such as yourselves really need, and as we get older, we just get tired. I get it, man. We just get fucking tired, right? But if there was something that we could do by, re-energizing and taking people under our wings and saying, this is the next group of people I think can do this, and mentor them so that we can fight the good fight. Because guys, without you, it's going to just be a sinister, sad world. And I mean that in all sincerity. Okay. We need more mentors. And I think all the fakers, and Duncan, you might enjoy that, I think all the fakers are now leaving the space, so to speak.
By the way, I think you've actually hit on something there that I also see as a problem, which is when, first of all, even though I said earlier, like what ESPN should have done, I just said it like in a blithe way, like they should have just hired Richard as editor-in-chief. Well, the problem is, one of the problems of the esports industry with its incentive structure before that era is people like me and Richard were editors-in-chiefs. It fucking sucks. Yeah. It's one of the worst jobs. Like, even though actually the reason we did it, funnily enough, was that was one of the first ways you could ever make a full-time living, because obviously the beat writer doesn't make enough in esports. So at the time, it was usually just the one big journalist at the site.
Think about what come out of that, Duncan. Think about what was the format you brought to esports when you were at ESEA that they hadn't done before? Was it there was something that you pioneered? There was a particular format of article that you brought in. I can't remember what the format was, but it was like...
Oh, it was like a sort of editorial one. You mean one might be sort of a column or something?
Yeah, well, I'm talking pre-columns. I think SK was more the kind of column era. Okay. There was something you brought in at ESEA. I can't quite remember. It was like a way of putting the information. It was like maybe like a good land, bad land kind of thing or something. I don't know. Oh, right, but anyway, okay. But the point I'm making is that when me and Duncan were editors of our sites, we understood the importance of unique content and identity. And every site that we were at, like as I said, SK Gaming, what they did editorially was they had all of their big name writers do a column, like a weekly column. And you had like Carmack did it. There was the Zex files, if anyone remembers Zex. Shout out to Zex, my boy. Obviously Duncan was doing one. And what we did at Cadred as well was I wanted to, when I was editor, I was pioneering that more like irreverent style of coverage to esports. My weekly column was called Gonzoria, because my name was Gonzo. I was only writing about like the bad stuff, the crazy shit, but we also were like doing, just in general, we would go to lands and kind of stick our snout in. Like our coverage was all around like, this is what it's like to be here. These are the sights, the sounds, and a quote, Spinal Tap, the smells. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were doing that embedded kind of style, So like the websites we edited we stamped our identity on them.
Yes.
And they may have been good, they may have been bad, but they were unique and they were distinct from each other. We couldn't have had the rivalries we all had growing up if our websites weren't different, trying to do different things.
Yes, but I was going to get to the point is, the problem is that time, at least as it stood at the time to be an editor-in-chief, we've done that period of our careers, so we don't want to explicitly be the editor-in-chief, but then the problem you have is, I'm totally open, as I pointed out, I've done it with many, many people, to mentoring people. I'll tell you what the big problem right here is, Kevin, which is when someone comes in the space, do you know how many, what, I've actually had to become like mad paranoid about people. When they become famous, the first thing I do, I take their Twitter name, I go to that advanced search that has Thorin with 2 O's, Thorin with 3 O's. I put in what have they said with those names, and I click enter. And the amount of times the person who otherwise I would have been reached out to, hey, good video, like come on my show, like we'll do like a talk show or something. I find like 3 years earlier, before they became famous, they've just trashed you, or they've said something recently for clout. And I actually think that's where the modern clout journalism thing will destroy any chance to become a mentee of Richard Lewis. Because the problem is, before you'll ever get a chance to be a mentee of Richard Lewis, you probably already did a blocked screen of Richard Lewis to get some clout. And then you probably did a stupid thing of like, well, of course, you did that thing with Lord. And you've done all the greatest hits. And if he ever finds that, why would he extend his hand and work with you? Like at that point in time, yeah, it might be good for the industry overall, but it's bad for him as an individual because you've been rude to him, you've been a shit to him. And so I actually feel like, unfortunately, this new school approach plays so badly against what the old school tried to stand for. You're also just going to make a crazy divide. And you're going to end up in a world where like, these people almost like fuck up before they get to the chance to then become someone and to become crafted into a figure and do great work. Because I've had a few people like that, Richard, where I haven't told them publicly because, again, I'm not obliged to. But yeah, there's some of these people that actually maybe now they do some good work. But mate, if you're that much of a prick to me for 2 or 3 years, I'll let someone else mentor you. There you go, mate. Someone else can take your turn on that one.
I mean, that would never stop me. What would stop me from doing anything like that is it's like it would be cruelty. Don't do it. Don't. The industry has fallen. It's been captured. It's over. Like there is not a single piece of journalistic work you will ever produce that will change the trajectory of where we're going to.
Oh,
so like it is so over. Come back in 4 years maybe, and then let's take a look.
Yeah, Rich, you're a teacher now. Rich, you're an adjunct professor. You can't say that, man.
I don't teach journalism.
Okay, all right. But
I teach sports integrity and how to spot people
that's
violating integrity within sports.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
And I say in my class, if you want to use these skills to go work in esports, good fucking luck. I wouldn't. Yeah. So I'm not going to lie to my students.
Yeah, I didn't know.
And to hammer home this point that nothing you can do changes, like I think Thorin has brought up a good question in the past, which is like, what would the Saudi Arabian government have to do for people to disavow them at this point in time? Like, and if you're just, so basically I'm saying, even if you broke a story which revealed heinous things about Saudi Arabia, those stories already exist, guys. They already exist. They're fucking everywhere. So there isn't anything that you could report on, even outside of esports. Even if you were a Middle East journalist and you had an insane scoop about Saudi Arabia, I don't think it would move the needle because the people have already decided to work with them and they already are engaged in the sports washing, and no amount of bad information, including wars in Yemen and journalist assassination and human rights violations. I mean, here's an example for you. Right before the Esports World Cup in early July, right before it started in League of Legends, there was a news article on the New York Times about a man who was the creator of a Netflix animated show, who was a dual Saudi and US citizen, who had been lauded for years by the Saudi government for creating this animated show, who was then put in prison for 13 years. He just got put into prison for 13 years, and he is not allowed to leave Saudi, even though he is also a US citizen, for 30 years after that. And this was somebody that they had publicly celebrated previously, and then they brought a kangaroo court against him and put him in jail. And this happened immediately beforehand.
I will say this, and if it gets me in trouble, maybe a little bit, but Saudi Arabia is not going to change. And the reason it's not going to change is because of their practices there. It's just not, and people don't understand. Just like you're not going to change Christianity and how they work, your Catholicism, Islam, you're not going to change those tenets and what people believe in. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to be, somebody that goes across and changes people's minds. And again, I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you're not going to change people's minds when it comes to religious tenets and what they believe in, period. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. No, I agree. I often point out, I notice no one else ever seems to take this tack. I always say, I get sick and tired of everyone talking about like the people of Saudi Arabia, right? As though we know what they think, right? Because one of the weird things that these companies keep implying is they go, no, it's just the government. You have to understand the people. They're just like us. Like they want like all these freedoms like in the West. And it's just the government though. Like they're in control. Bro, if you ever go into any thread that's about criticizing Saudi Arabia or people working with Saudi Arabia, you will nearly always find in that Twitter thread tweets from Saudi Arabian young people who are teenagers and young adults, and they will say stuff like, not at all like that. They won't go, I agree. They'll go, who the fuck are you, Westerner, to tell us your values and impress us? That is the tack they take, and that is the young person. So I actually don't know that we can even buy this idea that like it's just to stop people if we can influence them. Like, here's a crazy idea. If you really believed that, guys, then go and do an investigation into Saudi Arabia. Go and talk to people on the street. Find out what they think. Find out what they want to change in society. What they like about society. The joke is you couldn't do that, of course, because it's a fucking totalitarian regime. But if you want to pretend this premise makes sense and it's sort of bubbling ferment to any minute, go and burst into pride parades. I think you owe it to yourself to go and actually show us this. Let's do this human interest piece and find out what because the few times I've had these interactions, like I say, actually, even the people who are Saudi Arabia sort of said, can you just fuck off, please? Like, I don't agree with any of this. And in fact, that's why usually they're the ones who go, what about the US, etc. That's why it's the classic refrain, isn't it?
I do believe that part of that is astroturfing.
So you know. Yeah.
No, sure.
I do believe that part of that is probably astroturfing, because if you don't think that part of what is going on right now in esports is a large spend for social media presence, like obviously, part of the sports washing effort. And by the way, I'm not accusing the Saudi government of being just the only ones guilty of this. Every company, including US companies, they now, as part of their PR campaign, are making fake posts on Reddit. They're making fake posts on social media. They're making false reviews. And so that is definitely happening with this event too. So I do believe that part of the social media response has been a very deliberate PR campaign that has been run by either Savvy Gaming or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia itself.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's what, again, my point is just changing people's minds in countries that live a certain way because of religious tenets or whatnot is almost an impossibility. That's basically my point.
Even if they were going to change, Kevin, they wouldn't change for Western video game tournament.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the big one.
I just want to give me a break. You know what I mean?
There are many different ways to interpret religions, and so, but it's not going to change because of esports.
That's a great point, Thorin.
We can definitively say that one.
No.
If we're making the stakes.
Yep.
And as we know, all of these things are merely, if you think that it will change, like, again, we have to say this, the reason why this is being done, the reason why the money is spent is so they don't have to change, right? This distracts from the core human rights
as you said, as said earlier by Richard, they don't need to change it. The joke always was that it was always the most disingenuous framing. They're changing us. Hence why Richard just said loads of teams, which by default, not even thinking would have done a pride announcement in past years, intentionally haven't, because they now are on the teat of the Saudis. And so those people are now tweeting less and in a very specific, careful way about topics that previously they could speak freely about. Guess what? We're becoming like the Saudis now. We're suddenly under their regime in a lesser degree.
It's even being retroactively applied. As I pointed out on Summoning Insight, Thorin, Riot deleted the post that they made about Neom walking back the Neom deal. It is no longer available on
That
lolesports.com.
is, by the way, because if you're the talent who allegedly put your jobs on the line to stop that deal happening, they've just essentially 1984 Room 101 that story. It doesn't exist anymore. It never happened. We were never against Neon. That's the world you now live in if you work for Riot, by the way. So that's why when people are taking these stances, it's like these stances aren't for fun, you know. You're claiming you care about something really serious. So there are going to be consequences that come with that.
And I know that journalists have written to Riot and asked them about that with no response thus far.
Classic. Yep.
Yep.
Think how cynical it is as well, because that's a story from 4 years ago, which, by the way, you have to actually know a little bit about the journalistic details to even sort of really strongly connect it. Like, I think most people Googling that wouldn't even know what they're looking at. But that just shows that this was like clearly systematically someone told them, get rid of that shit. And so they did. They've just cleaned the whole thing. But it's the thing, they're not even trying to do it like carefully. They're just shooting the hose and just blasting everything down.
Thorin,
and now it's all nice and clean. Yeah, brilliant.
It wouldn't surprise me if this was part of the contract that they made for the Esports World Cup. It could be in the legal contract. Like, we pay you the license fee. You let us run this event. You delete this post. You know what I mean? Like, I think they would demand that as part of that contract.
Or a broader statement saying no, you know, disparagement.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
So it's gone now, though, guys. It's gone. And this has been something that I don't think a lot of people have been commenting on either, which is like a wild reversal in Riot's policy from saying, oh, we really messed up here and it's against our values, to, you know, now it's just apparently their values. Remember, they claimed they had these values. So where are the values now?
Sure. Obviously, we haven't got round to having another episode, so many insights. I'll just bring it up now since it's relevant to this exact same topic. This is how you know they are changing us. They are influencing us. Their values are winning over ours. We are adopting their values implicitly. It's because, did you see that tweet the other day where you have to know Riot really well, like we do, Monty, to know why this isn't a donk on me and you. This is actually Riot being Riot. You know where Chris Greeley came out, the former commissioner of the LCS, and he made a statement where I'd have to pull the tweet up to get exactly what it said, but it was something like, you know, MSI next year won't be in the Middle East. Something like, or nor will it be in the near future, something like that, right? But here's what was very interesting about the way that was phrased, Monty. Again, it's always in like the semantics when it comes to Riot. He didn't say, don't worry, guys, we're not partnering with the Saudis for events in the upcoming years, or in fact, it's not even within our plans. What he said is basically the joke, guys, could be, they could do the tournament next year. It could even be MSI in spirit, but they could rename it to the Riot Riyadh not MSI tournament, and we'd all be idiots and wrong, even though in the terms of like the spirit of what we'd said, would be exactly right. And if you don't know that Riot would intentionally use the gap between what it sounds like they said and what they actually said to make us seem wrong like that, you don't know Riot. That is exactly the game they always play. Because the way that was phrased, Monty, like I said, we could do it somebody insight anyway, but like it was almost a work of art how cynically crafted the phrasing of that.
And also that wasn't just his tweet. That was workshopped by their PR.
There you go.
You know, and of course, here's what happened, guys, to make that tweet. They had an internal meeting where they were like, oh, shit, they're on to us. And they're like, okay, how do we diffuse this? Because remember, this is an issue within their company as well, where they have basically, you know, people are mad within Riot about this. And so they have to make sure that their own people, you know, fall in line.
Right.
So, you know, but they can't put it out on an official channel, Thorin. They can't put it out on a LOL Esports. So we have to find somebody who's going to put this on their personal account, right? Just to get the message out there. And so it was this guy. And I don't know why you would fucking agree to this, by the way. Like, again, just say nothing. Just say nothing. If you're not going to make an official statement at all. But this is always the game Riot plays. Like, where does the information come out? Does it come out on lolesports.com? Does it come out on their social media channels? Does it come out on a Travis Gafford, like, fake ass interview that they redo? Like, who knows where there is no official channel. They just kind of like use how they intentionally fragment this information so it's hard to understand who is responsible for making decisions, who is responsible for being the mouthpiece, right? Like, why is this coming out on this guy's account? Why isn't it coming out on John Needham?
Yes.
You know what I mean? The CEO of LOL Esports. You know,
any of these people.
It's super weird. It's incredibly weird that it's coming out in this way.
Well, didn't they say there was an unnamed event that I thought they in that new
there is a new event.
The road, the new roadmap, that there's a new unnamed event, right?
Yes.
So is that what these people are all
I think that's a different one.
So Kevin, I speculate that event will be at IEM Katowice, just given the timing.
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
I don't know that.
It's different.
Yeah, but what they did announce was they announced that in early July, which is the exact same time as the Esports World Cup, is when MSI was going to be moved to. And like the thing about that I said on SI is like, if I put on my evil PR hat, unfortunately, one of the skills that I have is I'm very good at evil PR. I choose not to use my evil PR skills most of the time because they are evil. But if I were to be inside of Riot, I would say like, oh, it's not good. We're just going to rebrand MSI because it's not mid-season anymore. It's kind of 2/3 of the way through the new season calendar. And by the way, it was never an invitational. It was a tournament you qualified for. So now the name doubly doesn't make sense. And so we're just going to rebrand it. And, why not just give it to the Saudis, call it Esports World Cup and run it for 3 weeks, or, give it a new name or whatever, presented by the Esports World Cup, run it for the 3 weeks or whatever, in Riyadh at that time period. It's just very suspicious. And so when they say that MSI 2025 is not taking place anywhere in the Middle East, like that might be true, literally, but it might not be true in spirit or practicality, right? Who knows? Maybe this is true. This is one of those things that I hope I'm wrong on, guys. Like, I don't know. I had a pretty good track record of talking about Riot stuff, moving to 3 splits, combining the Americas, all the other shit that I said. Also, Thorin, I will note that this is so disingenuous because this is another thing that Riot does where they just pick the thing and they try and get a gotcha in, but they didn't address any of the other things that we said on that show, including them lying about providing production support to Esports World Cup, the talent blacklist that they had for Esports World Cup.
Duncan, is if they just say what you just said, that is wrong. We did not provide any support. By the way, even though they might even be lying, but we would get donked on so hard. They would win that PR battle. I tell you, they would win it.
I mean, it's demonstrably true.
The fact they didn't, it's so conspicuous, right, that they didn't address any of that. That would be an easy donk, mate, because we were even speculating about that. We don't know for sure. We have to just guess.
I mean, they did because you can see it on the broadcast, right?
Sure.
I mean, they lied about that, and I mean, just factually,
but that's where they lied. The same thing again. That's where it's like, you probably used the same assets. Like, Chris Greeley, like, I think you'll see there's a hidden pixel at X17 and Y, and that's not the same graphic, is it? So actually, we didn't use it. I can't be bothered with these guys, mate. They're so fucking stupid. It's mad.
I know. So anyway, like, and it also is just, again, this is deflection away from, they're saying, oh, we're not working with the Saudis. It's like, motherfuckers, you did work with them. You proved it already. And so they're again just trying to deflect the fact that they are doing these things, and that they're not only that they're going to continue doing it, which they are, but they're going to expand it, because we know the only reason that they didn't have Valorant there this year was because of the Valorant calendar. It'll be there next year, guys. Don't you worry your head about that. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to expand further and further. And we know Riot wants to ditch production of their events, because why? Just purely from a business perspective, if the Saudi government wants to pay for your esports production, well, there's your marketing budget that someone else is taking care of for you. I mean, it's great for them purely from a monetary perspective. So like, when is the world happening where the LEC final is there? Also, Thorin, you'll notice it doesn't say anything about no other events in the Middle East. Like,
we're not partnering with them. We're not doing events in the Middle East.
Is the LEC final happening there? There's another one that could be happening, right?
Yep.
So Duncan, what happens with?
Yeah, Duncan, I just want to tell you, when you said, it's not. If we're feeling sort of the Saudi Arabian effect, I want to tell you how that hit home with me. Because I feel like sometimes when I'm talking about things that need to be talked about, I almost feel like I'm doing something wrong sometimes because of the way that the developers and publishers treat you afterwards, when really it's just a real candid conversation about something that needs to be discussed. But they try to make you feel like, no, you're not allowed to have two sides. You can only agree with us, because we are and that, dude, that hit me right when you said that. And so I just felt that, like, could not be more true. And then Richard, Bob Costas is also a journalist and a broadcaster. And I think, despite his political views, I think that you literally, in my eyes, are Bob Costas of esports. And I absolutely believe you can do those things.
Yeah. It's a bag of compliment.
I'll take that. Yeah, appreciate it, man. You know, but yeah, I think as well, just on the Riot PR front, yeah, absolutely, you're right. My instincts tell me they would be dunking on you if they could, and they can't. So at best, it's undecided. They'll do the dance if they change their mind at a later date. But right now, it's up in the air, and they're obviously having those conversations.
They wouldn't have finalized the deal yet, guys, because they would have been waiting for Esports World Cup to finish to see if they did a good job. They wouldn't have committed to it at this point in time. And here's the thing, guys. For my understanding of this was that that it is likely to happen. But the thing is perhaps there was some sort of internal revolt at Riot about potentially holding MSI there. It's like once people found out, maybe they did have people who are, dissenting or who didn't agree, or they changed their mind. Here's something, guys. Maybe something behind the scenes happened at the Esports World Cup that Riot's really pissed about that we don't know. And so they've changed their mind, right? It's possible.
And also, if you know Riot, I can tell you from the journalistic side, the most notorious bait and switch Riot goes like this. They are doing some fucked up shit. They've been doing it, or they plan to. A journalist finds out, does a totally professionally done, credible story that shows it. They treat it like it was a public focus group, Riot, and go, oh shit, the sentiment's turned against us. And they go, we either were doing that, but already before you said, decided not to, or we weren't really ever gonna actually do that, guys. Come on, it was just an idea. And then they don't do it, or even worse, they just delay it and go 2 steps back, 1 step forward. We'll just do that again in like 2 years and rebrand it, and then they just do it eventually anyway. That is Riot's MO to a T from the beginning of the on-games days, mate.
So anyway, it was a bit of a tangent, but let's wrap this up. So I know you guys have been wanting to talk about the state of esports journalism for some time. Like we have been talking about the idea of this show. Thanks a lot, Kevin, for coming on. It's great to have you. Do you have any, final thoughts on the state of this industry? Because like basically the number of credible outlets are at an all-time low. We see more. It's not just the Rolling Stone. It's but Esports Insider, ESI, is also doing paid posts now. This is the new model, is basically, doing paid
Monty,
for
even ones that
journalism.
don't overtly do the branded content, like it's totally officially a paid piece, there's other ways and means of skinning a cat. So if anyone's seen Alexander Lee's writing over at DigiDay, I would just say go and look up that piece he did called, think of the title of this and what I'm about to tell you. It's called Why the Esports Industry is Embracing Saudi Arabian Investment.
Yeah.
You scroll down something like 4 paragraphs, and in brackets, italicized, it says, editor's note, ESL/Faceit Group paid for this reporter's travel and lodging at the EFG-owned event DreamHack Dallas on June 2nd. So already, like, the joke is that may as well be branded content at that point in time, because was he really going to go there on their dime, visit the event, get showed around presumably, get all access, and at the end go, why Saudi Arabian money is a problem for DreamHack? He wasn't, was he? Like, it just goes out saying like he wasn't going to shit where he
on a serious note about Alexander Lee, that's the person going to get the journalist of the year.
He wrote a puff piece about Nicole LaPointe Jameson when she had been completely exposed as being a charlatan and, abusive towards her employees.
But you remember, that piece went out at the same time as her her Twitter announcement, which means it was pre-written.
Yep.
Yes.
Just do a search for the phrase life-changing money.
Yeah, let's do that as well.
Literally go on and just type in life-changing money and watch what articles and how many pop up on Google when you type that in. So look, let me just give you my last thoughts of this. Obviously, I think media needs to adapt to its new audience and how they consume things, right? We need to make sure we find our audience and get what we want to, what stories, what things we want to say. We need to get that out to them. I am deathly afraid. And I think I will say this, for me, I had never seen what I call lobbyist journalism until I watched that Acosta guy from CNN when he was questioning folks, tell them what their policy should be rather than asking them about policy. He said, no, it should be this. And I'm not joking. Like, I mean, I could find it, but I'm telling you, I watch it. He said the policy should be this. And it was then that I went, oh my God, we're lobbyist journalists. That is what we're seeing now. And that's why and it scares me to death, guys, that we're losing our unbiased actual voices that will tell it how it is with as much and least amount of bias as possible. And again, I would say this room, and including James and including a couple of others, I feel like we're going to be on the endangered species list very, very soon. And it scares the shit out of me. I'm just going to tell you. Yeah, as I'm saying, I'm 53. Guys, look, I'm 53 fucking years old. So
I have one other angle I can come in on here, because I love to hear what Richard thinks about this. The other problem I also think as well is I would find it very hard to give anyone advice as to how to get into journalism, because I feel like there's no ladder. The ladder was pulled up, or in this case, the ladder was burned and thrown off the edge. So maybe Richard can subvert some of these things. But I'll tell you an obvious example. So when I do my interviews just in gaming, which isn't anything to do with, I'm not trying to break story, I'm just doing interviews about players who play the game, what do they think and what results, right? Even those types of interviews are so heavily guarded by orgs now. I can tell you, here's how it goes. I am in an incredibly privileged position thanks to grinding for all those years and being known by the players. I can just DM the player I want directly. He can tell me I want to do the interview. And in my particular case, thanks to having built a brand as a good interviewer, hopefully, the player himself often won't even say, I have to get my org's permission. He'll just take care of that for me. He won't even say it to me. He'll just go to them and say, basically, I want to do an interview with this guy. He wants to do it on Tuesday at this time. And I will never even know that maybe he had to ask his org's permission. But I can tell you, in the modern day, a lot of the big orgs do demand that their players get permission. And the real problem is, every now and then you'll get a player who's very young, so maybe he hasn't been in the industry a long time, and he'll just actually send me through the normal process. I'm sure some of you people get this if you play, where I DM a communications / PR person at their org, and all of a sudden, even when like I've already agreed with the player that we're going to do the interview, let's just get them to sign off on it, basically, all of a sudden that person will be telling me all sorts of crazy opposite details, like, oh, I don't know if he's actually available, I don't think he's doing interviews at the moment. And I just think to myself, bro, if I couldn't essentially be in an insane position where I could just counteract this entire industry like set of people that would be between me and the player or me and the story, how would I ever get to this info? If I was the new person who might be equally as good at me as interviewing, you would never be able to get the interview. You just get turned away and fobbed off by all these people in the middle. And if you control those people, as these orgs and as these sponsors ultimately indirectly do, eventually the next group of people, the idea is, the analogy is, they're not even within the city walls. Like, we'll never know them. Maybe we're allowed to exist as an eccentricity and a relic of a past age, and we can sort of get away with a little bit of this, but I don't think the other people are even allowed in the industry to some degree. So that's another alarming thing, is I don't even think someone could follow my blueprint, for example. Like, I couldn't if I started now. I feel like I had to have already done the things I did almost before all this came along that gave me the status. So I actually think it's going to be tough times for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, it's really hard, because I agree. I think there isn't a ramp to get to where you might want to go if you want to do good work, honestly. And I'm a little bit different from the likes of Kevin and the likes of James, who are out there. Like, if you probably noticed, my journalism this year, a lot of it has been editorial, and I'm just trafficking in annoyance. I've broken a couple of stories. I just want to piss these fucking assholes off.
That's a good tagline.
Like, that's what we all are doing now.
Yeah, like it's like, it's not like, I don't deserve any fucking award recognition for any of the stuff I'm doing right now. Pointing out these people are hypocrites is like shooting fish in a barrel, but I know it pisses them off. I know what got me blacklisted was writing to every single fucking sponsor the same email. Your logo is going to be on an event in Saudi Arabia run by the Saudi Arabian state, and yet you say you care about, equal rights for women and gay people. What up with that, right? And sending that email 200 times or whatever it fucking worked out. That was the point where they went, you know what? Yeah, Richard's never coming on board, and he's not going to go away, and he's unhinged. Is it good work? Not really. Fucking waste of time. I knew no one was going to say anything. I think I got a statement from fucking Jägermeister. You know, that was like that was the net good that came of it. But I know it pissed.
Fine though. I'm glad.
Yeah.
What do they care? They can't be served
in college.
I got a few.
I mean, look, they can't be served in Saudi Arabia. They have nothing to lose.
Yeah, it was so bad. Funnily enough, despite that, they walked the line. But then again, they're a German company, aren't they? So you know what Germans are like. They're obviously fucking, gonna err on the side of caution diplomatically. It's just a way. So anyway, I got a few replies. But look, the work I'm doing now, there's nothing I can expose about the industry that people don't already implicitly know. I've seen this. Like I'm in a week or so, I'm going to publish an article about shock horror, more match fixing. The reaction is going to be a jaw-breaking yawn. And I get it. The audience, they're going to yawn. I'm yawning typing it. I can barely bring myself to type the same story again. Esports has been captured. There is no point in essentially, killing yourself, working so hard to do this type of work, when ultimately the fans have got what they always wanted. In the end, you've triumphed. We found someone that will finally pay for you to watch your fucking fireworks display. And guess what? Yeah, they don't treat women like equals, and they execute gay people. But that's a price you're just willing to pay. So it's all right. So well done. You win. There's no article I can write exposing this that's going to make a fan go, "Oh yeah, that's pretty bad." They know. Well, they just don't care. No one cares.
Richard, I'm just so disappointed in this industry, because how did we arrive at this point where it's like all these people who have been building the esports industry for years and years and years have just like, if you asked them 5 years ago if this was an acceptable place for the industry to be, they would have said no. And now they're just doing it. It's so fucking crazy.
Everyone gets real. Everyone talks tough when you've got a full fucking belly. And it's Christmas Day, and your kids get everything they ask for, and you get that happy treasured memory. And you go to the kitchen, you pour yourself a brandy, you wipe away a tear. It's never going to be this good ever again. Take that away from fucking people, and principles go out the window real fucking fast. This is what I mean. It's not even hardship. You have to understand. I'm not even talking about people being put in real hardship. I'm not talking about, fucking, having to choose between a meal or sleep like I had to do when I was growing up, because there literally was no food in the house. So you eat the last of it now, or you can just sleep, go to bed early, and we can eat tomorrow. Like, if you've never made that choice, right, you don't really know what life is. You don't really know what it is. That's why you can't take my principles away from me, because I'll go to sleep. I'll choose to be hungry. All right, yeah, that's the choice I'll make. These decadent motherfuckers that cruised into esport in the C-suite class, with their fucking suddenly got to build big extensions on their houses, suddenly got to meet celebrities, suddenly got to be in Hollywood and going to movie premieres and all these other sad little fantasies that they have that they think makes them people. They get to indulge that. But guess what? That was never going to last forever. Why would that last forever? I was on TV for 2.5 years. Why would that last forever? Why would I be some sort of institution? Why would it happen to me? It didn't. And now I'm back, rolling up my sleeves, doing the work, right? Supporting my community, supporting my fans, my audience, doing the work I want to do. People go, "Are you washed?" Yeah, maybe. But to be washed, you had to be somebody once upon a time. I'm comfortable with it, right? Like, it doesn't faze me. It phases these people. And so when you go, listen, you can have all your fucking tawdry little fantasies that can all come true. All you got to do is surrender all those principles you talked a good game about. Their kids are always getting their presents on Christmas Day. If it means a gay person has to be executed, quite literally, for that to happen, they're comfortable with that. That's who runs esports. That and it was ever thus. This should not surprise you. They have always been these weak, spineless, greedy losers. That's all they've been. Every single team owner. I knew it about them on some level, even the ones I like. You don't really stand for anything beyond this. You wouldn't go to prison for a cause. You wouldn't lay your life down for something you care about. All you want is the money, and it's not even fame. It's e-fame. It's so lame by contrast. Like
players know about esports and what I do here.
I have watched Shaq at CES walk down a row of tech things on us, like saying, "What's this? Buy a Segway. What's this? Oh, that's cool. Hologram light up for my car. Yeah, I'll take one of them. I'll buy them." I watched him spend like $2 million in about 5 minutes. Right? Wow. That is wealth and fame and power and influence and getting to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You got to meet Game at you got to meet the Game at a fucking Fortnite after party. Like, when's the penny gonna drop that there are some things not worth sacrificing for that
it's the shittest
version of him?
All time, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's always the joke about the Faustian. Everyone imagines that the deal is you get untold. No. You get what you're willing to give up. So if as a result you'll sell out for meeting the Game at an after party and not being at it, then that's what you'll be given. That's what the world will offer you, and you will happily take it. The one thing is, though, this isn't really like a positive, but I'll say, like with almost everything else involved with LFN, the one side that to some degree doesn't play totally negatively for us is the more that other people cannot ever speak about these topics, we will become the only game in town. So eventually, like that name I told you, we just picked that as a witty name. It wasn't supposed to be literal, that we're the last free fucking nation. So in some ways, I guess the other thing, it's not really better than money. I'd even be lying to myself if I said that. But one thing that's cool is, at least I get to live out, Richard, my dreams from when I was 7 years old watching 1990s, Pump Up the Volume, starring Christian Slater. And now I'm the one on pirate radio, and hopefully they don't shut me down.
Yeah, exactly. Great reference. But yeah, so, I mean, look, it's like I say, I'll come back and see what's happening in like 3-4 years. As soon as the Saudi drop-off kicks in, and they start tightening the belts, hopefully just metaphorically and not literally around people's throats. I'll come back and see what we're doing. But for now, there is no point. It has been the esports journalism falls into two categories now. Ones that have been captured and serve the interests of the Saudi Arabian takeover, or clout gremlins. I mean, like, you know, obviously me and James and Kevin and Duncan, we're all trying to do good work, but let's be real. What are we actually doing? What does it do? What is its function? The fans don't care. The people we're writing about don't care. It's like, I'm pretty sure if James was here now, he would say he's like me. We traffic in annoyance. It's like it's just the understanding. Okay, you get to win, but I will make your victory as fucking painful as possible. But I acknowledge you win. You do win. You have captured the industry. You have took it over. You cannot be stopped. You can stop me anytime you want, right? You can ruin my life, but I'm going to keep going. And that's it. But that isn't what journalism is meant to be.
Isn't it Sisyphus that was the one that rolls the rock up the hill? Yeah. And then, I mean, that's knowing that and still doing your job is to be commended.
By the way, I almost feel like this is where, though, I almost feel like people do get themselves a fake idea about what a journalist can do. Like, for example, if you're a casual fan and you watch this show or Summoning Insight, you actually might think, well, you got rid of like EG and Nicole Pat-Jimson. Like, first of all, that was even tangential in itself. She was already doing a terrible job and probably was on the outs anyway. And they all had to cut all the finance of the business. It was terribly run. But that's like an incredibly rare win to ever get anything approaching that. Like, the people actually who did the wrong get fired / have to rename themselves / have to go. That is so incredibly rare. It may as well be the ultimate outlier. That is not the rule. The rule, I mean, the joke we used to say is we used to just say this about the game shit. Like Nicola and I we've reported on a million things he did, and he won every single time though. He still did those things. He still did go and go into the stock market. He still did sell those.
That's why when I saw him at the major, we can laugh about it and have a drink. You know what I mean? Like, I fucked with you and I exposed you and I had your number at every turn. But yeah, he still gets to win. By the way, you can walk away from esports. He's still a millionaire. He's still got all the VC connections. Yep. You know, and by the way, whatever you do outside of esports, you know what? Good luck to you. That's another journalist's problem. Yep. Right? So if you're doing anything shady. But, you know, yeah, fucking, this is what I mean. It's like, I miss when it was almost, there was this adversarial respect for what we did.
I mean, they weren't killing people, so it seems bad at the time, Richard, but it actually seems like the breath of fresh air at this point. I'm like, you know what? Can we go back to those days where you're just owning multiple teams pretending not to? Not
Yeah, I mean,
killing people and pretending not to, or rather killing people, not pretending not to, and paying me to not say you killed them. Like,
and then killing me if I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, you missed out a step in the chain. But that's what I mean. It's like, how can I take any of this fucking serious anymore? Like, we tried to hold the line. Journalists tried to hold the line for years. We warned about conflict of interest for years. We warned that esports wasn't going to make any money for years. We warned that the fans had to start paying for years. We have been saying the exact same stuff about the problems with the industry for fucking years, if not a decade at this point. And in the end, it went exactly the way we said it would go if people didn't listen, because people didn't listen. And now, once you lose that final existential battle, there isn't a way back. Like, put it this way, what do you think happens if the Saudis just, do a rug pull and decide esports ain't it, and they stop funding and the Esports World Cup goes under tomorrow? What do you think happens? What do you think the industry looks like? Do you think we just bounce back like a rubber ball? You think everyone keeps their jobs? No. We've got all the same problems.
Black Tuesday type shit or whatever, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Bro, there will be all of those teams, by the way, that are funded by the Esports World Cup. Everyone's cut loose from those teams immediately. Yep. I mean, by the way, there's already talk behind the scenes that, exactly. As soon as they got eliminated from the Esports World Cup, they were just out. Yeah, right. But their salary was paid for. The org wasn't even willing to be like, well, we'll keep you around and see if we can make some content around you, because the game isn't worth it. So this is the thing. What do you think happens to all those players? They're all unemployed straight away. What do you think happens to the orgs that have been like, I mean, some sponsors have even walked away from some of these orgs recently, like just in general, some of it related to the esports winter, maybe some of it related to Saudi. I don't know. But, a lot of sponsors have pulled out because orgs have been lying to sponsors for fucking years again, fudging the numbers, right? So do you think they get sponsors to make up the shortfall? Well, who would it be? How many more gambling websites can we realistically attract? Crypto's dead. NFTs are a fucking scam. What are we doing? So we've arrived. This is the final stop, guys. The party's over. This is the end destination. And everyone seems real comfortable with it. So fine, maybe this is what esports was on rails to always become, in the same way that American politics feels like it was on rails to become this insane dystopian nightmare, because every piece of modern satire now cannot be satirized anymore by the end destination of American politics, and how fucking globally embarrassing it is. Maybe esports was always going to be this thing. And in which case, by the way, in the total acceptance of absurdity, truth no longer matters. So if truth no longer matters, journalism no longer matters, because it will not move the dial. And so that's where I find myself today. That's what I think. I struggle to write about esports. I really do.
Oh, well, you couldn't satirize esports anymore. You can't satirize it because it has become like, how do you make it more extreme than it already has become now?
Yeah, it's the end stage, and unfortunately, if we're meant to be arbiters of truth, and we're meant to be the people that are helping the people out there not get exploited, understand the reality of what's happening. What do you do when you go out to the fans and they say, "Yeah, of course we understand it. We know what's happening. We're just okay with it, Rich. Thanks for another article about Saudi, but yeah." You want to write about someone else? Well, yeah, I guess I better had. This battle's been fought and lost, my friends. All I'm doing is fucking flipping over the fucking corpses on the battlefield and seeing if anyone's still breathing. Spoiler, they're not. So, let's do something else, guys. I'm comfortable. If you're happy with this version of esports, you can have it. It's great. Jake Lucky gets to tweet and go to Riyadh. Ralph Reichart gets to run a fucking little mafia of the mediocre and blacklist people and strong arm people. Dog shit players get to get picked up by orgs that wouldn't have touched them with a 10-foot pole if it wasn't being bought and paid for by the Saudi Arabian state. And you get to pretend you've earned it. Everyone's happy. It's all one big fucked up lie. And like I say, if it's one big fucked up lie, journalism is irrelevant. It's the antithesis of that. So yeah, there you go. That's what I think.
Lovely. Well, I mean, as you guys can see, it just gets more and more depressing here in esports.
It was meant to be
so-
depressing. To be fair, I'm not going to lie. I am affected by the fact I've just seen a video of an attempted presidential assassination. It's kind of spun me out a little
Jesus
bit.
Christ.
So
I'm gonna fight
you
the
know,
good fight for as long as I can. I just
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Kevin,
Yeah, you do
you're
it,
at
mate.
Sports Kita now. Where can obviously they get again the limited pool of like actual journalism has been lowered. Has been drained substantially. So, Sports
Yeah.
Kita, Kevin, where can they find you? What are you up to?
So check this out. This is true story. So Sports Kita is actually looking to grow in the space. They're hiring a couple positions. They have an esports editor position open and another writer position open. So go check that out. It's on LinkedIn and on their site. So you can literally go there, careers. They're actually hiring esports folks. Who would have thought?
Right.
Yeah. So, but you can find me at Sports Kita. My name's on there under the gaming and esports section, and then at on X Kevin_Hitt. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say it has been an absolute pleasure to be here with such icons in the space. I really appreciate the ask and me being here. And again, I've been following your lead for quite some time. And as Duncan and I have our own special story, I've needed to apologize to him more than once. And Duncan, I really appreciate you being benevolent in that story in itself. So thank
he's
you.
a wrathful god, but a benevolent god.
Yes, but he knows what I'm talking about. So
Thank you,
I appreciate
Kevin.
it.
Keep up the good work. Thanks for being on the
Yeah,
show.
man.
Also,
Appreciate
shout
it.
out to the other journalists who keep on grinding. Like, if you guys
Yes.
are not aware of the Esports Advocates, please also check them out.
Yep,
They've
absolutely.
been
Boy,
writing a
James.
bunch of James Fudge's been writing a bunch of really good shit.
Gonna be the
on
last man
various-
standing at this rate.
Yeah, he will be actually.
So obviously, like, I think they know where to find you, but Richard supporting your Substack, Thorin supporting your Substack, always good options, right?
Yes, for them, they do good work, man.
Yeah, it's going to be about American politics for the rest of the year. But yeah,
especially
support
now,
it.
right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. This feels important.
Just a little bit. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us for the state of esports journalism here on the Four Horsemen. Another depressing episode, but what is there to celebrate at this point in time, really, right, guys? We will see you in a couple weeks' time. But until then, as usual, esports delenda est.